G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 6 of True Blue Conversations with your host Adam Bloom, the author of Easy Target, now available at adambloom.com.au. 8 years ago, after returning from 3 tours of Afghanistan and then gaining experience and education in financial planning, Warren Loudon teamed up with fellow veteran Dave Vaughan and started Loudon and Vaughan Private Wealth, founded with the underlying belief that every person matters and every dollar counts, providing comprehensive tailored financial advice and wealth management services for you and your family. Loudon and Vaughan will guide you towards your financial goals with integrity and transparency. Whether you're planning for retirement, investing for the future, or managing your family's wealth, they've got you covered. Visit loudonandvaughan.com.au or call 02 9538 2704 to book a meeting with Warren today.
G'day, welcome back. Today, I have a very special guest. He's come a long way up from overseas. No, I'm only joking. He's come up from Tasmania, and he has had a very distinguished career in both 3RAR and the 2nd Commandos. And we've been setting this up for a little while now, and it's actually great to catch up with him in person here in Sydney. And here is his story. So, Shane Cav, welcome to the podcast, mate.
No, thanks for having me, bro. It's our first in-person one.
It's great to be with you, mate. And so, mate, you've come up from Tassie, so thank you, cold old Tassie, mate. So, welcome. Well, it's cold and shit up here in Sydney anyway. So, yeah, welcome back, mate. You left the place and you're back again. So, mate, thanks for joining us. But, mate, before we get into your Army career, let's go back to a young Shane. Tell us about you growing up.
Young Shane Cav. If I'd sum it up, it was quite transient. I moved around a lot growing up. So my dad, he worked for Coles supermarkets, and sort of while he proverbially climbed that corporate chain, he was working as a store manager. So he was sort of the Mr. Fix-It guy, and we bounced up and down the East Coast for most of my life growing up. So all the way from Bega all the way up to Coffs Harbour and everywhere in between.
And for you, mate, I know we have a bit of a connection to the Blue Mountains, mate. You ended up at, we both went to the same high school, mate, St. Columbus.
St. Columbus, yeah. So it was, getting into my childhood later, but it was refreshing. It was a good school. Yeah, that's where I finished up my schooling and where we settled down in the Blue Mountains that I called home for the period before I joined the military, and it was really good. I really enjoyed the Blue Mountains and sort of Sydney after bouncing around so much growing up.
And that, mate, I know it too, because that's where I grew up, and it is a good place to grow up, isn't it? Like, you got the bush, and yeah, like everyone, mate, used to say to me, "Oh, the Three Sisters," mate. To me, they were just rocks. Like, you go, because you see them so much, and you sort of go, yeah, they're just rocks. But it's a beautiful part of the world to grow up, isn't it?
Yeah, I likened it. We did. I did before we moved down to the bottom of the Blue Mountains. We were right up at 3RAR near Katoomba.
Yep.
We were there for about 6 months. My dad was looking after the store up there before he come down the mountains, and I likened it to Tassie. It was cold. Yeah, we moved there in like June 2009.
Yep.
And it was cold.
Yes, mate, I've since moved away, and I don't miss the cold, actually. So, yeah, mate, I had 30 years of cold, but yeah, beautiful part of the world. But for you, mate, what was school like? Were you pretty good at school?
Yeah, I wasn't too bad. I struggled a little bit, like I said, being transient, going school to school, coming into that year, like 6-7 period, teenage years. Like, I found it pretty hard. I got bullied a fair bit. I played sports that weren't mainstream. I played tennis and baseball, and generally I was away for those. So finding kids in the area that played those sports was quite minimal. So I didn't have anyone at those schools that I would frequent those sports with. Baseball travelled a lot away, and then same with tennis. And
for you, you're moving so often, so very hard to make friends and so that sort of happened for you, and then finally you settle down in the mountains and finish your schooling. And what was next, mate? Like, what did you have planned after you'd finished school?
So in year 10, I decided that I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I've racked my brain to see where the inspiration came from that, and I can't find it, to be honest with you. It's not there anymore, but I decided I want to be a fighter pilot, and because I got bullied at school a fair bit, my grades were pretty good. So I either was doing sport, or when I was at school, I didn't have many friends, so I did my schoolwork, right? So up until year 10, my grades were really, really good. So I chose all the subjects that were required, physics, chemistry, advanced maths, stuff like that. And that was the path I, decided that I was going to go on. But it sort of flipped the script because I was at a school now that was inviting. I got along with the proverbial inverted commas cool kids. I joined the school rugby team, and then sort of, found that little friend circle click. So that happy balance of not happy balance, but the balance of my schoolwork being good, but not having many friends, that sort of flipped the script. So I had some friends, was playing rugby, and was enjoying school life, and sort of, the schoolwork took the back seat for those 2 years, right? So I got to my year 12 exam, and unfortunately, I bombed physics. Everything else wasn't too bad, but for anyone that's done physics, you can have the equation in front of you and not understand how to use it, right? So I bombed physics out, and that really damaged my UAI to become a fighter pilot. So that squashed that, and then because my dad worked for Coles, and I'd worked for Coles for the 2 years leading up to that, I just followed that natural progression. I guess a little bit lazy, didn't really go hunting.
And you still talk to some of your mates today, and mate. Some of your good mates that were at that school, one of their dads actually taught me at St. Columbus, so Mr. Evans. So, amazing how that world works.
Yeah, so me and Jimmy James, we're still good mates. He's with New South Wales Police. He's had a really awesome career as well. But yeah, I've got another two twins there. Both the one's Defence Force.
Yeah,
both
right.
Defence Force. One's still in, one's out now.
And that, for you, mate, as you say, you found it sort of just clicked for you at the end of that, like your final years of school, and then you go to, as you say, you found women and parties, and just finally found that you belonged. You bum out in your ATAR, UAI back then. It changed for me, ATAR, and so sort of bit rudderless at that stage of, well, what do I do? And you say that you're working for Coles, and then do that. When does the military come into for you to go, I'm actually going to join the military?
Well, obviously I'd had the aspirations to be a fighter pilot, so there was the Defence Force was in the back of my mind. But at 19, so I left school. I started a trainee managementship at Coles. I was doing pretty well. I was enjoying it. It was good pay. The lifestyle was good for a 19-year-old with that kind of money, but I just had this burning desire. But it was when my dad came home at 19. He came up with the DRS program, direct entry scheme. For the guys that don't know that, it's essentially a glide path for civilians to not have to join the military and do the proverbial time, and they go through the glide path for the direct entry scheme into the commandos. So my dad was an avid John Laws listener, loved it. When I, through my schooling years, I'd drive to work with him, and he'd pretty much fall asleep on my L's, and I'd have to listen to John Laws. So, yeah, so that's how it was introduced, and he came home with that, and once we looked it up, I thought to myself, shit, this is probably something that I could do. So I rang recruiting and started the process, but I didn't get far. I was 80 kilos, wringing wet. I had blonde tips in my hair. I was just this little party boy, so to speak. And I remember I sat opposite the commando giving the interview at the time, and he was just this big, burly, stocky dude. And he was just like, one, I didn't know enough information. I hadn't done enough research, but I think he just looked me up and down and was just like, yeah, I probably couldn't see you in a commando team right now, buddy.
See you, buddy.
See you, buddy, on your way. So that was that little dream. Put a pin in that for a little bit, and I went back to Coles and travelled the world for a little bit and worked my way through the trainee management ship. And it wasn't until a little bit later on, I was working in a store out at Cambridge Gardens, a really nice store, and I was working in the cold food section, and the guy went MIA for 2 weeks. So I looked after this department for 2 weeks, and I got the tap on the shoulder. It's like, hey, we think you're ready for your own department now, so we're going to go give you a little store. It's not performing too well, and see how you go. So it was pretty much pack your bags and head off to Doonside. And for the guys that aren't from Sydney, it's smack bang in the middle of Rudy Hill and Mount Druitt. Right in there, and at that time it was pretty rough. It was a rough area, and I
still hasn't changed much.
Hasn't changed. Yeah. And it was that double-edged sword, right? It was good and bad at the same time. I really didn't enjoy my time there. and that gave me the spark that I needed to be like, well, there's a little bit more in life to just this. And then my dad did as well. My dad sort of highlighted that's not the life that he wanted for me, which is why he brought me the DRS program, and he used to bring me all these other random like trades, and he's like, bricky labourer, like he always bringing me this stuff because I think he, deep down inside, he's like, I want more for you. Not that, he wasn't successful. He just knew that there was a little bit more in life than just stacking shelves at Coles and working my way up to be a store manager like him, right? So yeah, now I'm a little bit older, I sort of see the messaging there, right?
So had you had any other family members that served, or were you the first?
No, so I got grandfather on my mother's side. He served in Vietnam. He was an artilleryman. He was a FO in Vietnam. We hung out a little bit. We talked. We're not super close these days. And he was, as a lot of people are aware, the Vietnam era wasn't very enjoyable for them. So he didn't really talk much about it. We had a dinner down at the MCG for a veterans meetup, and he took me down, and so I got a little bit of an insight and some stories there, but not too much. He never gave away much at all, and I think he wanted me to join as an officer. We'll get to the officer board selection in a minute, but when I joined the Commandos, and he's like, "Are you going in as an officer?" I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm not going in as an officer, man."
And mate, you're right. The Vietnam guys, absolutely. I think, as I said to you, mate, before we jumped on, I've had one on the podcast. That's how hard it's very rare to get them to open up about their experiences because they were treated so badly.
Yeah.
And that's where I think now we're so... the modern day veterans have changed, and through the hard times of what the Vietnam vets went through, we've now got you guys actually coming, and you guys didn't experience the same treatment as what they had, like in your own experience as well.
Yeah. I mean, the climate at the moment's a little bit.
Oh well, yeah.
You know what I mean. Like it's we got to be careful for history not to repeat itself. But
exactly.
Yeah, definitely not as much as the Vietnam vets. They really copped it.
Absolutely. And mate, I always, every veteran I get on, I always speak to them, and a lot of them, especially a lot of commandos and SAS guys, or any veteran, and I always ask them where they were on 9/11, on the day that changed the world. Where were you, mate?
So I was in year 11 at the time. So I was in high school. So the first plane hit early in the morning. So I remember my mum waking me up. She's like, "Come into the lounge room," and she didn't comprehend what was going on. She just, it's like everyone. They didn't know what was going on, but they knew it was something big, and whatever was about to go down was going to change the course of history, right? So she woke me up early morning. I can't remember what time it was. Must have been like 4 or 5 in the morning, I think. Sydney time when the first plane hit.
Yeah, because I remember waking up and I flicked it on to Where's Cheese TV, and there was no Cheese TV.
Yeah.
So so it was early. It was early.
And I remember saying to her, I'm like, what's the TV? Like, I remember I was a little bit pissed because I was like, what the fuck is this TV show? She's like, it's not a TV show, it's the news. And I was like, holy shit. And then I think I was at school when the second plane hit. I remember seeing it from, if you remember, St. Columbus got the second floor.
Yep.
I was like back end near the teachers' offices looking in at one of the TVs going to one of the classes when the second plane hit.
And you didn't think, mate, that, that day you'd be, all those years later, fighting in the Middle East.
No idea. No.
And that's it, mate. That day changed the world, and we've never been the same since. And so that happened. That's ticking over. And then, so you're hating doing your, being a store manager, and it's as a pretty tough assignment. Like, they could have sent you to...
It was Cold Foods. It wasn't the whole store. It was just the little Cold Food section.
The Cold Food section and at Doonside. But, mate, they couldn't have sent you like somewhere down in Sydney or something to, so that happens. And then you've still got that burning desire to do, to serve. And then you just mentioned officer. So talk me through this, mate.
Yeah. So I sort of hit this flashpoint in my time at Coles where like I really wasn't enjoying life. I wasn't enjoying my time there, and like any time I could get off, I wouldn't. But it was really hard because obviously by this stage my old man's a regional manager, so he's looking after every store from Bondi Junction all the way to Burwood.
Oh, wow.
So he'd been a project manager for a while, and he'd taken a back step from that. So he was sort of working his way up. He was project managing a whole heap of projects through Australia, was getting a little bit burnt out, so took that step back. So he was looking after all these stores, and then all these regional managers would go into these meetings and they would talk about performance, right? So then obviously they'd highlight the best performing stores and the worst performing stores, best performing departments, worst performing, right? This little store I had at Doonside, I had heaps of waste. Like I didn't have staff members, wasn't performing. So there's my dad at these meetings, like worst performing store X, worst performing department is Doonside cold food section, and there's my name, right? And he'd come home and he'd be like, "What the fuck are you doing, bro?" Like, and I'm like, "I just hate it. I hate it." And I remember this. I called in sick once. Went out one night with my mates, and then I went back to his place and we were crashing out. Called in sick, and then my mum actually turned up to the store to give me some lunch. And they're like, "What do you mean he's not here? Like, where is he? Like, is he?" At this stage, I'm still living at home. And I remember getting this call off my mum, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, I had this big blow up. Anyway, long story short, I ended up just getting on the phone to recruiting because I'm like, "That's it, I'm done. I'm joining the army." She's like, "No, don't." I'm like, "I'm joining the army." So yeah, rang recruiting, and I can't remember how it really worked, but essentially what happened is they took my physics off and sort of recalculated quasi UAI, and they're like, "Look, if you take that out, you've done well." So they're like, "How does officer board selection sound?" Like, I don't even know what that is, but let's do it. So I started the process, and I made it all the way to the end. So at the end of the board, after all your testing, then you do an officer board selection, which is at Randwick. You just do a whole heap of stuff that's sort of like, it's meant to highlight any sort of leadership qualities that you may have, so that you've shown the attributes that you can be an officer, right? So did this full day, and once again, I got right near the end, and yeah, got the no bueno. Like, sorry, mate. And I was just like, fuck. And I remember sitting in the room, and you have a panel of higher ranking of mid-level officers, and I just had nothing to lose. And then when they said no, I think I was on the fence. They called me in and out a few times. We did a couple more interviews. At this stage, I'm not too worldly. I've worked for Coles. There's guys doing like epic speeches on the Rats at Tobruk's and stuff like that. There was paramedics, and there's people that had like solid experience. So yeah, they ended up telling me that I wasn't required, and off I went. But I was just like, "Hey man, there's got to be something for me, like something." So off I went out of the room, and they were like, "How does a Royal Australian Engineer sound?" I was like, "I don't even know what that is, but let's do it." So, yeah, within 2-3 months, I was on that bus headed down to Kapooka.
Yeah, right. And so engineers, mate, off a whim of hating Coles, joining up, and so you get to Kapooka, mate. And what do you remember? Because back then, no political correctness when you joined, so it was still, was it in your face? Like, do you remember Kapooka being in your face?
Yeah, it was, but it's as soon as I got there, I sort of understood that it was a bit of a game. So you got guys that are absolutely shitting themselves. But I really enjoyed the structure and the order. I was just like, from the moment I got off that bus, it was like, yeah, man, you tell me where to be, I'll be there. You tell me what to do, I'll do. Like, I enjoyed the structure. Yep. From the moment I hit the ground at Kapooka, I had a smile on my face.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So you do that, and this is halfway through, mate. You don't go down the engineer's path. What happens?
So one of the corporals pulls a bunch of us into a room and shows us dudes jumping out of planes. So it's 3RAR. This stage, I didn't know there was a 3CAR. So you could be an engineer and jump out of planes as well, but I guess that wasn't his intention. He'd earmarked some guys that he thought, probably good for the Royal Australian Infantry. But he, showed us this video, and probably within a couple of days, I was getting along with the infantry guys, as well. So, and I'd made a couple of friends, so I was just like, see how this transfer thing goes. So there's a couple of the corporals were infantry as well, and they helped me put in the application. Had a platoon commander that wasn't too keen on the idea, but they sort of pushed it through, and at the end of the 12 weeks, the paperwork still hadn't gone through. But literally the day we graduated, it was like, "Hey man, don't get on that bus, get on that one."
Yeah, right. And so you march out, and for you, I know most veterans I talk to, mate, always say proud day when they march out of Kapooka, and for you the same. Did you get the family down? And
family came down, grandfather came down. Yeah, it was good. Obviously I'd bummed the UAI. I was working for Coles, and suddenly now I'm in the military, and there's an achievement there. and I'd had achievements playing sport and that, but yeah, it hit differently. It was like something hard that I'd done for the first time in my life, and you do your march out parade. And as wanky as it looks when you look back on it, like when you're in the military or you go to one in the military, at the time, like it's a big thing. It's a huge thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll get into, your Special Forces career a little bit later and what that meant to you once you passed selection and passed Rio. We'll get to that down the track. But, mate, you go to Singleton. What was that like? Because Kapooka, I've heard, is, it's the start, and then Singleton's a whole nother beast. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, that was good. I had these layers that needed to come off through my career, right? Like, being so insular growing up, I probably had some personality traits that didn't really fit in the military. And then at every stage, these little things get chipped off you. So I probably had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder in Kapooka, and it got me into trouble a couple of times. But then that layer gets chipped off, right? Like I had the EQ to realise that that's probably not a trait that I can carry on any further. And for a lot of guys, Kapooka, they're like, I met some dudes at Singo that were like, man, I saw you at Kapooka and I thought you were a bit of a dick, but man, now we're here, like, you're all right. So same with Singleton. Like I got there, then obviously with all the infantry guys, you've got the infantry corporals. They don't really fucking put up with much shit. And then boom, once again, some little layers are getting chipped off you and moulding you. But once again, before the military, I'd never really shot a rifle. I'd never really done half the stuff. And I just loved it. Smile from ear to ear. Running around Singo with bayonet courses and in the bush, putting like camouflage on. Like I loved it. Every minute of it.
And for you, did you get to allocate which battalion you wanted to go to, or were you told, no, you're going to this battalion, or did you have that choice?
Yeah, we had our preference choice. At this stage, we talk about it with my dad. He was a bit crook with kidney disease, and obviously all my family was in Sydney. So we got the chance to put in preferences and the reasons why. And we had a really good section. So most of us, bar maybe like two in the section, all put 3RAR, and we all got it.
Yeah,
got our preferences. Yeah. And there was only one or two that didn't get their preferences that they didn't want.
And you talk about the famous 3RAR, mate. You march into 3RAR, and what was that like back in 2006?
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. I've said this before a couple of times, but it was sort of a whole heap of dudes were deployed, and we rocked up on a Sunday, so it was like the calm before the storm. So pretty much rocked in, got our little handover, our walk around, got given our rooms, and that was it. And then from there, we got pretty much put straight on courses. So it was pretty busy, but we didn't get to see the full brunt of the 3rd Battalion until essentially the following year when everyone come back from their Christmas leave and deployment leave.
So you mentioned that you got shown at Kapooka parachuting, and 3RAR was what they were famous for, and where the famous red, is it red or no? Maroon beret. So maroon beret, mate, and you. Talk me through that course, mate, and going on your para course. Because I've heard it's a hard course, and what was it like for you?
Yeah, so back then we had the old parachutes, so the T10s, the T11s now, they're a little bit more forgiving, apart from the lateral drift when there's high winds. But at the time, it had a really high descent rate, even under canopy. You essentially, I'd never been hit so hard before in my life. So essentially, you do. The biggest build-up is learning how to land properly with the static line courses, because the rate of descent's a lot higher. You're coming down like a pin, so you have a special way that you roll, right? So you spend 2 weeks learning how to roll properly, which is almost like a controlled fall, in some essence. And then you do all your flight drills and that malfunctions because you're so low to the ground when the plane drops you out that obviously you don't have much time to react if something does go wrong. So yeah, it was really good fun, but it takes a toll on your body, even just the flight training. You're in risers, in a harness, day in, day out, doing drills, pulling down your own body weight. And then you get to jump, and that first time that you hit the ground is like, it's epic. And then when you get used to hitting the ground, then they throw you out at night. You can't even see the ground. So your last jump obviously culminates to CE at night at 1,000 feet. Yeah, right. Can't see the ground. And if you do see the ground, generally you think your shadow is another person. So it's...
yeah, right.
Yeah. And through the course, it was like broken ankles, bruised tailbones, like dudes, there's a casualty rate attached to it.
And do you guys you go down to Jarvis Bay as well. Is that right? Yes.
There was no water mod for that at that time.
Yeah,
there was no
right.
water jumps. Yeah, they're not until you get across the fence till you get the beautiful soft landings of the water jumps.
Yeah, right. And that's, mate, Jarvis Bay as it is with sharks. So yeah, no.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I think we maybe saw one or two.
Yeah,
during
okay.
my time down there, and generally they were just reef sharks.
Yeah, okay. Oh, well,
not that they're not there, but yeah.
just get it done. And mate, what was that like? Because you pass your course, and you get presented your maroon beret. Another step, another achievement.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's getting the beret. It's more the wings. You've already got the beret because you posted to the unit, but getting those wings is what you want. So you put them on your parasmock. And at the time, there's no one else wearing those. It's like a baggy jacket that we got to wear. It's a parachuting specific jacket that you got to wear, and then you got your wings put on it.
Yeah, right. Oh, mate, proud moment. And then, mate, what's happening after that? As you say, back-to-back courses. What do you do after you get your wings? Like, what's the next course that you have to do?
I think it was like a week or two, and then we went straight on a heavy weapons course. So we got split up. A couple of guys went on recon course, and then I got earmarked to do the heavy weapons course.
Yeah, right. And so is that back up to Singleton, or is that still in Sydney?
It was a bit of hybrid. So it was Sydney, and then I think the back end of it was a Puckapunyal.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. And then is there any, at that point, is there any talks of deployments at this stage, or are you just courses and just getting used to life in the battalion?
Guys are already deployed. So at this stage, Iraq and Timor are already active, and they're the responsibilities with 3RAR. So boys are deployed, and then there's no real talk of us going on any deployments. I think it was a Timor rotation the following year, but at that stage it was just like, the new guys, you just concentrate on what you're doing now, which was the courses.
Yeah, right. So you do that, and then so that's the end of 06 into 07, and then, mate, you get stood up and rapidly deploy to East Timor, your first trip overseas.
Yeah, first deployment. Yeah, so at this stage it's just back to back. It's like Puka, Singo, then it's like paracourse, heavy weapons, and then next minute we rock up to work on a Thursday, and it's go grab your shit, we're going to check all your stuff, and we're like, oh, here we go again. DP1, pull all your stuff out, make sure you're operationally ready to go anywhere. And it's like, hey, we're heading out of the range, guys. We're going to zero rifles, calling your family. You're heading overseas.
Yeah, right. And so you deploy in 2007, and what was that like, mate? Because, most guys I've spoken to, Timor was the step, then they kept progressing. And what was your role over there in 2007?
So essentially what had happened is when Alfredo Renara broke out of jail, and then 4RAR was going to go in and do the hit. And then our responsibility was to provide the outer cordon. Somewhere along the lines, whether it was politics or whatever, we get there, or whether we got there late, we probably had a dwell of maybe like 12, 24 hours. And then it was essentially like, nah, stand down. Hit's already gone in. 2RAR, I think at the time, had done the outer cordon. Some guys had slipped through, and then it was like, well, you're here now, you may as well do the rip out. So we ripped the New Zealanders and the 2RAR guys out, and guys flew out to the various patrol bases or areas of responsibility to essentially assume those roles. So some of the companies stayed in Timor itself. Some flew out to Gleno, and then our platoon flew up to a little place called, I think it was called Ayanaro. Little village up in the hills. It would take you hours by vehicle, but mainly it was Hilo out there. So they set up a refueling station there, and it was essentially like the refueling point for the Hilos to bounce around that area. And
that is, for you, is that the first time you live ammunition, like that's live?
Yep.
Yeah. And what's that like, mate? Different mindset now of, this isn't training anymore, and what was that like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I had this. I've never actually talked about this. Actually, I had this moment in the H pod where the A pod where the aircraft had landed, and so we flew in. We'd already zeroed rifles. We'd already done that stuff, and I guess this is where you look back at the green machine on how essentially retarded it can be sometimes. It follows these processes that don't need to be done. So, not taking the blame off myself, but we flew in that morning. We woke up, so our rifles have already been zeroed. Yeah, we're in a tropical area, but everyone's rifles are clean, right? And we get in the hangar. We're in a hangar with the whole company plus of dudes, and I'm sitting there, and section commander at the time of the 2SC is like, "Hey, clean your weapons." And I remember thinking to myself, "This is fucking retarded." Like, we've zeroed Like, okay, cool. And I remember just haphazardly going through like a clean and wipe, and I'd come out of basic training in Singo. So obviously you go through with the stire when you finish, you're cleaning your rifle, you go through a final function test. So I'd haphazardly gone to clean my rifle, and I'm like, oh, I just got to do the final function test. So as I'm going through the final function test, I started, so I cocked the weapon, and I'm like, yep, cool, weapon doesn't fire. And then as I flick the safety catch over to fire, I realised that I've still got a magazine on the rifle, and I'm in this hangar with all these dudes, and I remember having this like fucking shiver up my spine. And I've told this story to a couple of dudes, and generally it's guys that have like ND'd on the range or something like that, or they've fucked up with their rifle. And I remember the chill I had coming up the back of my spine, I carried through my whole career, touching any firearm or weapon system going through, right? And I never had another incident. So right from the get-go with live ammunition, like I almost fucked up, and I was like, holy fuck. Like, and that set the conditions for the rest of my career, right? So I was like almost fucked up instantly in the hangar. I didn't tell anyone. I was just like, holy fuck. It was my own internal thing, like gut check. But that was the start of my trip. And it was like,
far out. And as you know, mate, that you dealt with weapons throughout the rest of your career. And as you say, sometimes you need a moment like that to go, oh shit, hang on, switch on here. Like I need to never take that complacency again. And complacency can come into any situation in life.
Yeah, and I definitely saw it through and guys in the Defence Force will attest to it all the time. In Iraq, it was happening all the time back then as well, because they were going through multiple checkpoints requiring different degrees of weapon readiness, and dudes were firing off. And then even in Afghanistan in 2008, we would have to go into the vehicles at load, but then when we get out and do 5 and 25s, so at the time when we would drive, if we had any type of stop, whether it was short or long, there'd be a 5 and 25. So two guys would get out and check 5 metres and 25 metres around the vehicle, but as soon as they stepped out, they'd have to go to action. At the back of the vehicle, they would go back to load, and then they'd hop back in, drive 200 metres, stop, and then do the fucking process all over again.
Geez. Yeah, right.
So you had dudes putting rounds into their feet, like, yeah, it was just nuts.
Yeah.
Like it was sort of, and like I said, it's no excuse, but those moments where it's like there's no logical thinking behind what an individual should be doing with their firearm or their weapon system, and it's like maybe they shouldn't be touching it at all. Maybe they just fucking leave it for the entire time until they're ready to be at that weapon readiness for that so-called threat, not because they're going from one point to another to another to another to another. It's like just keep it at the one so they don't touch it, right? Yeah,
100%. And so that, and was that for you, like, because how old are you at that point in
21.
21. So you're in Timor, mate, and was that a 3-month deployment for you?
Ended up turning out, it was meant to just be a couple of weeks in and out, but yeah, it turned out to be 3.5 months in the end. I think halfway through we got told there was a timeline on it, but there was a while there where it was like, well, I don't know. No one knows yet.
So that happens, mate, and then you come back. So, and proud moment. Well, obviously you got to, as you say, mate, you got to do your job. You got to go overseas and deploy, which is what all military want to do, is go on deployments. And so you come back, and then this is a moment, mate, a life-changing, in that same year you come back, and a life-changing moment where your dad takes his own life.
Yep.
And mate, if you can share with us, and it still haunts you to this day.
Yeah, it's something that resonates with me, and it's quite deep, obviously, but yeah, there was obviously there's a build up to it, right? So he'd been diagnosed with kidney disease at 19. He'd gone for the police force application. Through the medical, they've picked up in his blood work that he's got some problems with his kidneys, and they've highlighted that he's got kidney disease. So they're like, sorry, mate, you can't. At that stage, the standards were quite high in most of those organisations. So they were like, no, sorry, mate. And so they gave him like 3 or 4 years. He was probably going to need a kidney transplant. He didn't get it till like just before I deployed to East Timor in 2007. So he just looked after himself, made sure he always had his blood work. Growing up, there's always this like piss bottle next to the toilet that he'd have to fill up for the doc and then put in. And he was always really cognizant of his kidney function, right? And his longevity in life. So it wasn't until just before that East Timor trip, he gets the tap on the shoulder. It's like, hey, like you're either going to go on dialysis or you need a kidney. So he didn't want myself or my sister to give him one. Didn't want to take that risk, but then his sister ended up giving him a kidney. So surgery was super successful. Like I said, just before I went to East Timor, minimal anti-rejection medication, and yeah, he was good to go. Obviously deployed to East Timor, and then when I came back from East Timor, there was just something. They were just looking back on it. It was all these combat indicators, so to speak, on things that were going wrong, like the personality traits that were changing. He was quite stoic and happy-go-lucky, and then there was all these things that were suddenly affecting him in life. You know, he's getting quite emotional, and so yeah, in October 2007, we got a call. There was some periods of time where he went missing. So you know, one of the last moments I had with him, he drove me back home from back in the Blue Mountains, back to base. Car was in the workshop, and yeah, had a good chat, and he was quite emotional. And then I remember he dropped me off in the car park, and he just gave me this big hug, and he's like, you know, like, I love you. And I was just like, man, that's a bit weird. Like, I love you too. Like, it was nice, like, you know, and I'm gonna hold that moment for the rest of my life. But he went missing that night. Mum called me about 3 or 4 hours later. She's like, have you seen your dad? And I'm like, man, he left here ages ago. I don't know whether he was contemplating doing it that night, or he was doing a recce or whatever, and popped up a couple of hours later, and he's like, I just pulled over on the side of the road for a kip. And you know, the travel distance between Holsworthy and Penrith's
it's not far.
It's not far, right? It was a 40-minute drive. But at this stage, like, I'm 20, 21, 22, like, it's just not in the back of your mind, right? Like, if that was to happen today, I'd be like, all right, there's some fucking warning signs. What is going on, right? But back then, I'm just like, it's weird, but whatever, you know? And, yeah, so there was, I can't remember what night it was, but it was I think it might have been the Sunday night or the Monday night. I was on guard the next day, and he goes missing again. And I go to sleep. Mum calls me at like, sorry, I'll digress. Mum had given us a call and told us they'd been diagnosed with depression, I think on the Monday. It's like, hey, your dad's been in the doc, he's been diagnosed with depression, he's going to go on some medication. Like, remember calling my sister, I'm like, hey, my dad was quite stoic. I was like, hey, let's catch up, have a dinner, have a beer, and we'll have a chat on how we can, you know, support dad through this. 21 and 17 or 18, however, well, my sister was 22 and 18, I think. So just two kids trying to figure out what's going on with their dad, right? So I'm pulling up to my sister's place, and I'm backing in the car, and my dad calls me, and he's like, hey man, I want to say sorry for the last, you know, couple of weeks and how I've acted. Like, you know, I love you, right? And at this stage, I'm back in the car, and so I'm distracted. I'm like, yeah, dad, like, no dramas. We're catching up for dinner tomorrow night. He goes, yeah, catching up for dinner tomorrow night. And he's like, I love you. And I was like, no dramas, dad. I'll see you tomorrow. So I hang up the phone, and I walk up to my sister's apartment and knock on the door, and she's just getting off the phone. And she's like, "Was Dad?" And it's like, "He tell you he loved you?" And she's like, "Yeah." Once again, naive to everything that's going on, right? We're like, a little bit weird, but let's go have a chat. So we go for dinner that night, and then I end up back at base because I got guard the next morning, and then I get a call from my mum at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. She's like, "Your dad hasn't come home." And like, it's just it's a deep pitted feeling, right? Like, I was like, something's definitely up. Like, you know, at this stage the naivety's gone, and you know, logical brain's kicking in. So I end up driving out to my mum's place, but I had this moment where I'm walking to the car, and I was like, I'm just going to back Tracy's steps. I'm going to find where he is. And there was just this internal dialogue that was like, no, go home to your mum, go home to mum. You know, and you know, we'll talk about faith later on, but you know, looking back on it, it was either him or God telling me like, nah, like, you need to go where you need to be right now is with your mum. So I fought that for a couple of minutes and hopped in the car, and I even, like, coming out of Holsworthy and there's the highway to go left or right, I'm still having this like internal like dilemma of which way I'm meant to go, and I end up choosing mum. So I drive out to my old girl, and she's obviously upset, but then I had this like green machine kick in that it's like, you got guard tomorrow. If you don't rock up to guard tomorrow, you're going to get in the shit, you know? So I've got like this, like, looking back on it, like, just like, fuck, right? That's the environment that the regular army can have sometimes, is that like, you've got this like life crisis going on here, but it doesn't equate to what you've got, your responsibilities in the military, right? Yep. So I've got this internal fight going on there, and then I end up, kissing my mum at like 4 o'clock at night or something, at 4 in the morning, and I head back to base. I drive back to base, eyes hanging out of my head, and try and get some sleep. I think I dozed for about a minute or two, and then it was time to call mum again and see if he was home. And I called her, and then she spoke for a couple of minutes, and then she's like, "I got to go." And I was like, "Oh, that's weird." She hangs up the phone straight away, and about 2 or 3 minutes later, I try and call her again. I'm calling her over and over again, and finally she picks up. And she's like, from what I remember, she's like, "Oh, I can't." And I was like, it was like the penny dropped. Like I just knew, like instantly what was about to, what she was about to say. And I remember I said, "Just say it, Mum." She's like, "Your father's gone. He's gone." And I was like, "How?" She's like, he's killed himself. And that was just like, that moment was just like, my life would be changed forever. Like it was like you're on one set of railway tracks, and then someone flicks that switch, and then you're just like, you're on another. So that was, it was intense. Obviously I was alone. It was like 5:30 in the morning. One of the boys was up living above me. I went and knocked on his door, and I'm like, "Hey man, this is what's happened." And he's like, "What do you need me to do?" I said, "I don't need you to do anything, man. I just need someone to be with me." Remember, I went back to my room, and I was just screaming. I was just like, "What the fuck?" Yeah.
And for you, as you mentioned, like you got what's going on, like home life, and then you got the army life. And did you then go to your CO and say, "Hey, look, I need some time off," or what happened next with the army? Were they supportive in what had just happened?
Yeah, they were. It was an interesting moment at the start though. I obviously grabbed my bongos, and my mother come and pick me up with my grandmother, and I was waiting at the guard room. Obviously told the guard room what had happened. They're like, "No dramas, man." Like, and then I called my platoon sergeant, really awesome dude, and I was like, "Hey man, like this is what's just happened. My father's killed himself. Like I need to go." I was like, "Is there anything like?" I think I said, "Is there anything I need to do?" And he's like, "Oh, if you can just go to the platoon office and do a leave out for me, that would be awesome." And I was just like, once I was like, "Yeah, no drama, Sarge." And then I took about 4 steps towards the platoon office, and I was just like, I'm not doing that. I'm going. I'll wear whatever's fucking coming after. So my mum and my grandmother come and picked me up and took me to my uncle's place, and it was this moment, right? I was, I'd done infantry training. I'd done my para course, my heavy weapons course. I'd deployed, for all intents and purposes, I thought I was this like big man, right? And I remember I got to my uncle's, and I just fell apart on the couch, and it was all sort of like this moment I realised I was still a boy.
And that for you, mate, because as you said, you're 22, like. You are still like
I'm still a boy, yeah.
Still a boy. Like
I'm still a boy.
Yeah, and for you, this is the first? Had you lost other relatives or anything at this point, or was this so? Yeah, and to lose grief it's a hard thing to deal with it at the best of times. This is your dad, So I understand. For you, as you say, it changed you. How are you travelling mentally at this point? Like, I know it had changed, you've said it, but was it just, okay, have the funeral, but keep cracking on? Or how were you at this? Can you remember that?
Yeah, I guess that's, that the young mind's malleable as well, right? So, like, I had that military construct. So I had 2 weeks off, really supportive. At this stage, I created a really good bond with the unit padre. He helped me through a lot of that, I really struggled with the fact that I was Roman Catholic, I wasn't super religious, but it had been a part of my life.
Yep.
I come from a traditional Roman Catholic family, like it was always there, right? Like, when I deployed, my grandmother gave me a St. Christopher, patron saint of travel.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yep.
It was always in my life, right? And I remember, like, I had this I was really confused on like purgatory and suicide and how that would look on the other side. I'm like, hey, like I know I'm not super religious, but if this is real and this does exist, like what does this mean? So, as a 22-year-old, I'm having these really deep and meaningful conversations with this Anglican priest about, purgatory and suicide and, helping me through that. And then he sort of just took me under his wing, sort of guided me. And at this stage, like back then, the Padres still had some pull within the units, right? Like they they could talk to the CO, they could walk in the office, right? So I think I had sort of like this little guardian angel within the battalion, sort of watching over me, right? Like in the coming months post that. And then Christmas leave was a bit of a write-off. I sort of like just went, oh, fuck it, let's roll. And then when we came back, that's when the Afghanistan 2008 trip was starting to spool up.
And because you just mentioned Afghanistan, it's starting to heat up in the sense it was starting to come into the news and things were happening, and your mum's dealing with the loss of your dad.
Yeah.
How is she about you going over to Afghanistan? Because at this point, it was the most dangerous place in the world to be. How was she?
Yeah, she wasn't too good. She was a mess. Yeah. She was obviously coping in her own way. You know, she had some complexities in her younger years as well that she was dealing with. So, you know, now that I understand, you know, trauma and what it can do to the mind and body is pretty nuts. But yeah, she wasn't in a good way. It was but she, you know, saw me in my career, in my element, and, you know, supported me the best way that she could, you know, physically.
And your sister, same, like she's obviously worried that you're going to go over as well and deploy. And do you remember much of your mindset or how you were in that lead up to, or is it a bit of a blur, that 08 period?
Oh, it's a long time ago now, but at this stage, like there's not many dudes that have lost their lives over there. I think when we got over there, I think Poppy, the ASLAB driver, he'd been killed the rotation before. So that element wasn't there. So, you know, while my family knew I was going somewhere dangerous, it really hadn't spooled up like it did in the following years leading up into that, like when I joined the Commandos. And, you know, so it wasn't as intense as it was when I joined the Commandos. Then it was like, you know, there'd been some deaths, like it was on the news. It was sort of widespread then. So then the families knew that, oh, like he's going to do some shit, right?
So you get over there, mate. First trip over to Afghanistan. It wouldn't be the last. There'd be a few more after this deployment. And were you part of the MRE, or what was your? What were you part of?
RDF 4.
Yeah, okay.
Rotation, so Reconstruction Task Force. So it was engineer led. So essentially, the infantry attachments were essentially the protection party for the engineers to be able to do their thing. You know, hospitals, patrol bases, etc.
So good deployment. You actually 8 months that one? Or?
It was long. Yeah, it was like seven months, I think, all up.
Right.
So we got the Rockall, got to go home. It was a long one. And we spent a lot of time outfield. Most of that time was spent outfield, living out of the Bushmaster. But, you know, in retrospect, looking at my career, it was a good stepping stone. You know, I did Timor. It wasn't too nuts. Like, you know, the 3 months we built one of the patrol bases, we were getting rocketed most days. Yeah, you know, it was like 5 o'clock in the Arvo, like clockwork. Rockets would come in and they would land near there and everywhere. How no one ever got hit it baffles me to this day.
Yeah, right. And so you do that. You have your Rockall, and then you finish that deployment, and then what's happening back in battalion when you get back from your first trip to Afghanistan?
So then the rest of the battalion was in Timor. So half went to Timor, half went to Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
There was like a skeleton crew left. So it was pretty much everyone coming back from deployment. So a whole battalion full of dudes all cashed up, ready to go. It was interesting. Really fun.
So, and is this the part where you're starting to look, as you say, you dabbled with the direct entry sort of back in 2003? Was that 2003? Was that? Or?
That was 02.
Yeah,
03, sorry.
03, yeah.
03.
So and then 09, is this when you start to think, hey, I'd like to actually have another crack? And as you are at Holsworthy, 3RAR Commando is over the road, he's still in the same, in Holsworthy. Is that when that starts to come back into your head and giving SF a bit of a crack?
Yeah, so in that 08 trip, because I'd already been at the unit for a couple of years, then there was a suite of dudes that had done that selection over that time, so I knew. So we were bumping into guys deployed with 4RAR at the time, and then we had a little bit of exposure to an SASR patrol while we were out in the field as well. So there's a little bug there that when we got back, I was like, okay, cool, maybe there's a stepping stone there, and maybe I should look at, you know, looking to progress through that.
And so you come back, and back then, what's the process? You put your form in to do selection, or how's it work?
Yeah, you put an application in. So there'll be a dedicated SFET for that year.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I ran 2. I think that the years I came into it was only 1. So essentially, you time your paperwork with that. So once the if you're going to go 09, then you put your paperwork in at 08. That gives you the time to obviously do all the testing required and then get your body in preparation for that as well.
Yeah, right. And so you did your SFET, was it?
09.
09.
I attempted my first one and unfortunately cramped up in the pool. But that was by lack of preparation. I hadn't taken it seriously enough in the build up. And
then what's happening? So you have that sort of first crack, and that doesn't happen. Are you still keen on getting into special forces at that point, or what's sort of happening? And when I cramped up in the pool, got pulled out, and then realised I hadn't put in the work required, and then I went back to the battalion, and I fell into that proverbial this is me now for a little bit, probably about the next 6 months. Did my PJM static line, my jump master static line, and then I did my heavy weapons officer NCO to run the gun lines, and got a little bit comfortable. Those courses don't require much physical activity. Yep.
And was on course with some good dudes. So it was like beers in the afternoon. I stacked on a little bit of weight. I remember looking down at one stage at my cams, and I had 1 or 2 on instant. I'd either have to go up a size in cams, or I needed to sort my shit out. And it wasn't until I got on the PJM Jump Master course where I dispatched the water mod, and the water mod was predominantly guys from 2 Commando. And, everyone's fit, smiles on their face, loving life. And I was just I should pull my finger out and fucking give this a proper crack. Yeah.
So that finally, and for you, mate, how did you, because 2011 you do that, you go on selection, and how did you physically prepare and mentally prepare differently to the first time?
I'd obviously highlighted that I needed to work in the pool. I could stomp. I was in heavy weapons, so that was no dramas, right? So, and then do the 12-week program to the T, because that's what it's built for, right? It's built to get your body ready. So I swam, got myself a swim instructor, swam for the year, and then because I could stomp, I I really dialed back the stomping. A lot of dudes, that's what they'll mainly do because they can't. So I was in heavy weapons at the time, so I knew I had that covered organically within the job role itself. So it was just a bunch of cardio. Just torsion bars, push-ups, heave beams. That's pretty much just what you need to do, rinse and repeat, and get your body used to doing that at different hours and times of the day at different energy levels, right? So you'll get dudes that'll hop on the selection course that look super fit, and they've followed this nutrition regime, they've followed this training regime to the T. They haven't they've stressed their body, but in a really controlled environment. And then you get them on selection, you take the food away from them, and they're they don't know what to do with themselves. I'm not saying that's for everyone, but predominantly, sometimes you'll see the fittest dudes are the first to go. They'll self-select themselves. They're I'm out.
And so you do the 3.2, and most of the guys I've spoken to, mate, say the 3.2 is just an absolute gut punch.
It's a killer.
Yeah, it's a killer.
It's a killer.
And 16 minutes full webbing, everything.
3.2 kilometres.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And I remember I had little Bergs on, mate, and he said it himself. It was, for him being a 5'3", it was the toughest thing he ever did.
For guys like that, they reduce their lifespan by probably 5-10 years just by doing that alone. Some of those smaller dudes, they're hauling ass.
100%. And for you, you're a bit of a bigger dude, so you get in second time, you pass all your testing, and then you go on selection, mate. And what do you remember of selection, and what was for you the toughest? Because I've spoken to a lot of 2 Commando and now Perth guys as well, and they've said that selection's just that first step. It's it's just you pass to say that you basically can then go on the reinforcement cycle. What was the hardest part for you?
Look, the selection itself was really hot. It was super hot. A lot of dudes went down in the first lot, but it was really long as well. So, I'm not going to sit here and say it was the last of the hard ones, right? But the selection process from both units has gotten a lot more performance based and scientific to understand that, you know, let's test to see how far these dudes can push themselves without, you know, breaking them. And at that time back then, like, guys would do selection, do Rio, the reinforcement cycle, then either deploy. Well, some guys would deploy straight away. They would go MRE, they would deploy. So their body's under load from the minute they hit selection. Then within 6 to 8, also within 12 months, they're humping mountains in Afghanistan fighting, right? Like in body armor with all that weight. It was just like, it destroyed your body. So one of the hardest parts was how long it was. So it was 6 weeks all up, but it incorporated a lot of your weapons tactics phases and things like that as well. And you're just getting PT'd to the wazoo. So like at week 2, everyone's at the same fitness level and you're just getting absolutely beasted, you know? So probably one of the hardest things for me was the first time I'd had that voice creep into my head, you know? A lot of guys would be naive to think it doesn't creep in, but yeah, that little voice that creeps in to be like, oh, well, maybe we'll just go back to the battalion. And you see dudes like pulling off week 3, week 4, they're just making these like small excuses like, oh, I think there's a little bit more I can do in my career. I think I might hand in this little piece of paper. So one of the hardest things I think is fighting that little voice and putting it at the back of the head. You know, because you go on selection with like, the only way I'm coming off this selection is like on a stretcher, you know, and you've got to keep that mindset going on. But then every now and then this little voice will come in, you know, you're hungry, you're tired, you're wet, like you're miserable, and then like the mind games that are going on, the trucks that are getting stopped, and it's like, hey man, why don't you just hop on the truck? Or dude making a brew with a little bit of feed on your Navex. Like there's all these little mind games that the DS play that if they catch you at that right moment with that little voice, like it can, you know, for guys.
For you, did you have a moment like that as well, or were you
I had one or
good?
2 moments.
Yeah.
I remember I bumped into one of the guys who's my best mate. We've been mates since I joined Kapuka. He ended up going to Delta Company. I remember bumping into him. We'd split into 2 platoons, and we were on the tactics phase, but we'd done all our demarc and all that. Like we'd been stripped bare, essentially, and they were essentially doing this serial where it was like 8 days where you would go out for the day and night, come back, resup, and you would go again. So depending on what instructor you had, sometimes you were doing like all your counter ambushes and all that through the night. Then you would come in no sleep, and then if you're lucky, you got an instructor that would let you get your head down for maybe like an hour or 2 if you notice maybe like you were completely combat ineffective, so to speak. And I remember getting into that phase, and the voice, I'd come in one morning and we'd been doing break contacts for like 5 or 6 hours through the night. I remember coming in, restocking my rats in water, and I bumped into him, and I'm like, man, I think I'm cooked. And he just had this smile on his face, and he's like, no, you're not, bro. He's like, keep going. I'll see you at the end. And I was like, that was just enough to boot that voice back to the back of my head, and then keep going.
Because in that, and I'm looking at the notes that you sent through to me. In 2011, mate, was a very costly year, and as you know, you were on selection when you heard that Brett Wood was killed. And what was that like, mate? Being that, you know, you guys are gearing up to go over, and I've heard so much about Brett, and did that play a part in, okay, this is now we're playing for keeps now, like this?
Yeah. So, yeah. Rowan Robinson also got killed that year as well, and I was on the bus with Rowan heading down to Kapuka.
Oh, well, yeah, right.
So when he was killed, that was probably more heavy than Brett Wood, because obviously I didn't know Brett Wood, but that was a big deal because that was like he was well renowned like within the unit. Like when he was killed, like dudes like, holy fuck, it was that proverbial like, well, if he can get hit, then any of us can, right? So it was a big year. We were on Rio. I remember doing Brett Wood's memorial, and it was massive. It was huge. And that coupled with on the selection, we did this stand. It was really hot one day, and we got brought in, and all the guys that had injuries got brought in, and we had this big medical lesson, and we got shown the most like horrific injuries that you can suffer while on the battlefield, right? And I'd done Afghanistan in 2008. I'd seen some stuff, but this was like confronting, like soldiers in uniform, missing limbs, like it was intense. And then one of the guys who'd been shot multiple times through the hips, he got up, pulled his dax down, showed his scars, and then obviously the Tuga. So it was like, yeah, that year was like, even though we're doing selection and reinforcement cycle, it was like, hey, this is real. And from there, a lot of guys self-selected. They're like, no, not for me.
And so how many started, mate, and how many finished by the time you'd finished selection and the Rio cycle?
By the time we finished the Rio cycle, and some dudes had filed through back and done their courses again, I think maybe like high 30s, I think, out of like 130 maybe that started the selection, and then there's maybe like another 800 that have their applications in. So usually it's like 1,300. I don't know the exact number, but yeah, like by the time it dwindles down, I think we finished with like the mid 30s or something.
So high attrition, like you got to be there to want it. Like you know, like that's high attrition. So that, and for you, mate, on Rio, did you have anything that you struggled with, or were you okay like going through your Rio cycle?
Roping was always my like Achilles heel. It's just something that never, like, I love jumping out of planes, but suspending myself off a rope on a cliff just didn't. Roping was probably my toughest one out of that like sensory overload piece. Like I was just overloaded because I just didn't like hanging off the side of cliffs. It just wasn't my like. You're getting taught how to build all these anchors and redundancies, but then you're hanging off one rope, and I'm like, well, what if this one goes? Like, so I remember with the knots and stuff like that, like just trying to, like, and there's dudes that just love that. Yeah. They love that stuff, and it's just like later on in my career, just before I got out, I went and did my roping supervisor's course, and I remember the amount of preparation I had to do for that course because I was like, it's just one of those skill sets that like. Oh. If I had to do it, I'd go back to it, but it's not something. I wasn't the dude that got tapped on the shoulder. I was the guy like you're the roping guy. That was like, that's not me, bro. So.
Mate, I know it myself as a first responder, and it's not really my forte either. There's guys that absolutely love it and will tell you every fibre in the rope and everything. Yeah, no, that's not me, mate. And you just keep tying until you until you can't tie anymore.
I remember my we did when we were doing the build up for the tactical assault group. We were abseiling off one of the police headquarters, and I was like full mop gear, right, like gas mask.
Yep.
Then I had like a partner saw hanging off the side of my hip, and I'm like on this rope, and it's just like I'm breathing heavy, and it's one of my last memories I have of roping. It's just like my goggles are all fogged up, and I'm just like.
Mate, great. And for you, mate, proud moment, you receive your beret, and did you feel, mate, that your dad was with you that day, that you'd finally achieved something that you'd set out to do, that you'd sort of started all those years ago, and did you feel that he was with you that day?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it was super emotional. I had all my family there. My grandfather was there, and getting that beret, it was a huge milestone in my life. Like looking back on it, like I once again achieved something really, really difficult, really hard that only a small percentage of individuals get to achieve.
And for you, mate, it's, as you say, that proud moment, Kapuka, but this is the next level. Like you've gone through selection, blood, sweat, and tears to achieve that special. Only a few people will ever wear those special forces berets, mate. So that happens, mate. And then so what company did you go into?
So we're in an ALF company. They were on tag. They were on tag that year, but it was sort of late in the year, so we were sort of like helping out, a little bit of swinging dicks just to finish off the year. But it was ALF company had obviously been through a fair bit leading up to that. They had the helicopter crash in 2010. That had the Mason Edwards incident. So we were sort of like, there was a bunch of us that went ALF company. So half went to Delta, they deployed straight away, and then half of us went to ALF company. So we you talked to some of the older dudes, it was like, you're a bit of the revitalisation that ALF company needed after, the big rotation they had with their lost dudes. And then they had about half, they had a fair few dudes post out as well during that time. Yeah.
So that, mate, you post in and then deploy to Afghanistan. This is your second time, but totally different animal, being a special forces operator now. This, you were there in 2008. Talk me through this, your first trip as an SF operator in 2012.
Yeah, so at this stage we rotate in. We get handed over from Delta Company. It's funnily enough the dude that I'd bumped into at selection that had the smile on his face. I was mortars at the time, and he was the mortar guy too. So him and I did a handover together. So it was really cool to have one of your best mates do a handover with you. But it was they'd set the conditions hard. They were super kinetic. You know, they had the two lines of sort of the counterinsurgency and then the counter narcotics as well. And they'd been humming. They'd kicked some really, really big goals. So, you know, getting the back briefs on how their trip had gone, it was just like, you know, that running onto the stadium for first grade, it was like, we'd gotten the beret, but it's just like you've been selected for the team, but now it's time to run on the field and do the job. So, yeah, it was quite surreal being in country and because I'd obviously been on the other side of the fence, you know, no more than 3 years before, and then 3RAR had actually deployed to Afghanistan as well. So, either I would have been in Afghanistan, just in two different, you know, capacities.
Yeah, and for that, and this trip for you, mate, is highly kinetic and it doesn't go unscathed. You lose some guys, and mate, talk me through some of the contacts that you got into that first time, as you know, and you'd go back again. But talk me through some of the more memorable contacts.
Yeah, look, we were at this stage the vehicle ops had dried up, obviously with the IED threat, and the conditions of the country was sort of changing. So at this point, then 2 Commando was now punching into Helmand Province, so they weren't driving there anymore. So they were taking helos. So it was the jobs ranged. Like we were sort of like this versatile force that did a whole bunch of stuff. Like I said, we were doing the counterinsurgency as well as the counter narcotics, and then we sort of flip flop between the two sets. But like some of the gunfights, they ranged like super close all the way to like standoff. You know, it would depend on the job you were doing. Sometimes you were carrying like long range rifles because you're having standoff contacts, and then some were like quite, you know, intimate, you know, house to house sort of stuff.
And for you, so as we mentioned, you lost a couple of guys on that trip. So Nate Gallagher and Merv McDonald.
Yeah.
So 29th and 30th of August was a very, two tragic days for the Army. And, mate, you were involved in taking the fight back or going after the guy that had killed the three guys. Like, I've spoken to a lot of guys who have been at ramp services, and what was that like? Because you were on the ground, mate. What was that like, being that you'd lost guys that you knew, and, you know, it was our biggest loss since the Vietnam War, as in, you know, from when we were in Vietnam.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, it was it was definitely a somber day, like the ramp service. 2008 we'd had a whole heap, you know, coalition forces from like Afghanis to Dutch or whatever, so we were sort of exposed to that. But that one was you could feel the impact that had, right? You know, and it was because it was the two collective forces that had lost individuals at the one time. So it was like we all came together, right? Like they had separate services, but then we were brought in as one, and then the ramp ceremony together as well. And it was. You know, I'd known dudes that were in the room. It was one of those things. You know, I was really, you know, I wasn't happy because people were like, but I didn't know the guys that had been hit with three. You know, but it was impactful at the same time. You know, I knew that, you know, we were going through ours with Nate and Merv, and then they were going through theirs. But it was somber. But it was a beautiful send off for all five of them. You know, like the one thing I've always, you know, they never leave their side till they get home. You know, that's probably the most impactful if you've ever stood next to an individual for a period of time, because it's by yourself. That moment is just like nothing else. You're standing with an individual that's been killed. Fuck.
No, mate, no, and I know, mate, it's we're going to get to a moment a little bit later that's even harder for you, and mate, you've already had some hard moments with the loss of your dad, and you're losing teammates as well, and for you, because you were on the mission to go and that was one of the missions, to go and hunt the murderer that you know took these three guys. Yep. And were you like, were you informed very quickly that, okay, this is what we're like? How did you? All right, we're on the here. Like, how did you find that news that Merv and Nate had been killed? How did you find that out?
Yeah, so we were off cycle. I think we'd done a job the day before or something like that. So we were in bed. We were on forced rest. So it was like 2:00, 3:00 in the morning. We got woken up. And obviously I wasn't part of the HQ spin up. But essentially, first it was there'd been the helo crash. So first there'd been the green on blue, but that wasn't our responsibility. I'm pretty sure when we got woken up, we were going to be re-rolled to go and do the outer cordon for Oscar Platoon for the recovery because the helo was still on site with the guys. And then we got re-rolled. So after Oscar Platoon sort of like, hey, we've got this. We've got our outer cordon. We're self-sufficient. Then we got re-rolled and tasked. So if you talk to other dudes, they've got sort of different versions of events that occur. But from my point of view, it's essentially wake up. 3 Australians have been killed in a green on blue. Like, get your shit on. Like, we got orders in 20 minutes or whatever it was. So, and then when I got into the room, obviously, like, there was the feeling that because it was 3RAR, I was like, do I know anyone? Is there anyone I know in that that's involved? And then when Hesto got up the front, he'd explained there was 2 Cat Alphas at this stage. And it was just like, what? Sorry, what? So you go in with a brief that 3 Australians have been killed, and suddenly it's like 2 dudes from your sister platoon that you know have been killed also. So in a moment, within 20 minutes, it's like 5 Australians have been killed in two separate incidences. So yeah, from there, half the platoon they were going to fly in later on, but my team we got in a Bushmaster and we drove out to one of the northern patrol bases, which funnily enough was where heavy weapons was. So I had this moment where I was like, it didn't matter what I did over those years, I was always going to end up in this specific spot at this specific moment. Just I didn't know in which capacity, you know.
So whether you were with 3RAR or 2 Commando, yeah, right.
On that patrol base in that period, exact moment in time.
Yeah, mate, I'm getting goosebumps just like, wow. Yeah, right. God works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? He really does, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later in the potty. And so that happens, mate, and then so you're on the hunt for this murderer. Hekmatullah, piece of shit. And that goes on, and then not too long after you lose the guys, mate. As I say, this deployment, you lose another guy as well that in your own was attached to you guys, Scotty Smith. Yep. And mate, what do you remember of this day?
Yeah, so it was another pretty memorable one, you know, not only because we lost Scott, but it was like a 3-day tank assault. So essentially we were to clear an area down in Helmand Province all the way to Keshmesh Khan, where we'd lost Brett Wood and Rowan Robinson, and married up with tanks during that job and flew in. And then later on that day they married up, and then we essentially cleared a quite large area of the AO. But yeah, it was pretty nuts. We've been in contact for most of the first day, and it was like the movies. There was rockets going overhead, rounds. It was just nuts with Abrams tanks. And then we sort of started to telegraph where we were going to go. And the second day in the morning, we sort of stepped off, sort of staggered. Like I said, versions of events for different dudes, but essentially Scotty's team they stepped off and they were clearing essentially like an IED, facility, and that's where they got in contact, and Scotty was clearing essentially a fighting position for one of the boys, and while clearing that, just set off a low metal content IED, and unfortunately went up. And then the subsequent events after that was just once again anarchy. Obviously, it turned in from fighting to now recovery. We want to ensure that we got everything, but we were still in contact. So the fighting was that fierce at one stage. Like we couldn't get one of the teams through the buildings. So we had to find holes inside the compounds to blow a hole in the wall. We talk about TBIs and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was nuts. After that happened, we essentially rode tanks into battle. To cover ground quicker, we would essentially jump on the tanks and and get on in. You know, there was rounds bouncing off the tanks and rockets, and it was nuts.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
Far out, mate. Just that's wild to, you know, riding tanks into battle.
Yeah.
It's cool, but it's, you know, it's just to say that, you know, what's going on the battlefield at that time, and you know, like as you say, like Scott, you know, made the ultimate sacrifice, and from what I've heard, you know, Hesto spoke very highly of him, and you know, mate, I've just come back from Brisbane, where one of the dudes I've just interviewed was actually on the course to get him. So he was the Navy clearance diver that actually Scott helped him on his course to get him over to Afghanistan. So, and he was there in country when in your trip actually. So, and he said it himself. He said, "Mate, I got to have a couple of beers with him just before he passed," and it's just ironic how they all these podcasts all interlink with each other, and yeah, Scott unfortunately, you know, made the ultimate sacrifice, and mate, that happens. How are you travelling mentally at this point? Like, how are you going?
I guess it's one of those things, like your job's on, right? Like, you know, with Scotty, it was Scotty was hard as well, because I'd spent the night before that our teams had sort of bunkered down together, and the days leading up and the ops leading up, like Scotty and I had chatted a fair bit. We had a sort of kind of similar, you know, thing with our mums. His mum was no longer with his dad, and my dad had passed, and they were sort of starting to date other people. Scotty and I would talk in, you know, sporadically about that, about each other's mums. So I've got a couple of photos where we're sort of like, you know, just chilling out in compounds, having a fucking powwow. But yeah, that one was hard as well, because he was, you know, Nate and Merv, they were fucking awesome dudes as well. I went through Rio with Nate, and Merv was just one of those dudes where it was, same with Brett Wood, where it was like, if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone, right? But then when Scotty went up, he was such a key piece in our platoon's survivability, so to speak, because he was just a jet at what he did. All those engineer dudes, like after Scott was hit, our platoon formed such a tight bond with the engineer crew. It wasn't funny. We did everything together. But the respect that I had for those guys doing what they did was just like, they were just Jedis at what they did. And especially Scotty, he was finding that many. I think at one point he was like, fuck, like I'm gonna miss that one, you know, like he was just finding them all, you know. And not long before that, I think he'd found a big houseborn IED. The whole thing was rigged to blow, and he was essentially like, stop, you know.
Yeah.
And I had this moment, there'd been a mix-up with the radio batteries. Like, we had the tanks were meant to resup us, and they were meant to have all of the rations evenly distributed throughout all the tanks. Didn't end up that way. They just ended up, one tank ended up with all the batteries. Another tank ended up with, like, all the rations. It was like this. It was a bit of a clusterfuck, to be honest with you. And then, so we couldn't locate the batteries. So when we pushed into the compound, before Scotty had been announced that he was KIA, I'd turned a couple of the dudes off in the team to preserve batteries, because we had voice comms with each other. And then it came over the radio that Scotty was KIA. And I'll never forget it. Like, I had to walk up to our engineer, and I was like, "Hey man, like, are you okay?" And he sort of looked at me perplexed. And I was like, and then it sort of dawned on me, I turned him off. And I was like, "Oh fuck, bro, I'm sorry, man. Scotty's gone." So yeah, that one hit deep. Like, I remember that like it was yesterday, having to tell him that, you know, one of his brothers, you know, our brothers, was KIA.
And mate, I can see it now. It still affects you, mate. Like, it's absolutely. And so that, and this is what this is why I love getting you guys on, mate, to highlight that the mindset to just keep cracking on with the mission. Like, you know, you're losing mates, like good blokes that, you know, they are all great blokes, and just cracking on with the mission, mate. Like, that's hard. Like, that's a hard mindset to keep, mate, that, you know, you've still got a job to do.
Yeah, and I guess that one bites you in the ass a little bit later in life, because you get so good at compartmentalising that when you don't need to compartmentalise anymore, that your body, and yeah, that was, you know, we'll talk about later on, you know, some of my struggles post-military is like that compartmentalization starts to affect other parts of your life, especially relationships and those empathetic pathways that you can have when things happen, whether it's your kids or your wife or people that you know. So that compartmentalization is really good, and it's somewhat selected to ensure that individuals can manage the stress accordingly on the battlefield, and it's required. You have to have it, because if you don't have it, you can't lock that away and crack on with the job. Especially for that job in particular, we had another 24, 48 hours to go and take the fight to the enemy, right? Like, you can't afford to have those demons creeping in. It's like, I'll deal with those later.
And just keep just
lock it away in that box.
Lock it away
in that box.
And absolutely. And so that happens, mate. And then so another, highly kinetic deployment, your first one in Special Forces. But do you come home at that point, or what happens? Do you come home from that rotation?
So I stayed near the winter trip. So generally the reservists would come in and take over, but something occurred and they were like, we need to keep a full-time element. So I put my hand up and I stayed for another month or so, went on Rockall, went home, saw the family, came back. And then, it was obviously during the winter it starts to die down. Fighters they cross the borders and they go and train and get ready for the next fighting season. So there were some sporadic kinetic moments. We did a couple of big jobs where you almost get hit. So it's definitely not it's not safe, but it definitely dies down.
And that, I just want to highlight that, mate. Rockall, coming home. What was that like, coming, 1 minute you're in a war zone, the next minute you're back here, with your family? What was that like?
Yeah, that one was, it's an interesting one. I remember I'd maybe a couple of weeks beforehand, I'd been in quite a serious contact. We'd been ambushed, and then we had, I think it was 72 to 48 hours. I'd had another one, and then the next minute I was sitting at the Christmas table with my family. And the Rockall that I had in 2008 was fine. I didn't feel any that I'd felt. But, sitting at the Christmas table around my family, not understanding what the last, 4.5 months had been, and then trying to explain things that had happened in your life, it's just it's nuts.
Yeah.
Kissing your nonna on the cheek and being like, hey, nonna, how you doing? It's just
this is not... And at that point, though, mate, for you, are you... Because that's been your life. You're used to that way of life. That's you. You're Special Forces. But now that you're out and you look on it now, that's not normal, is it?
No,
that's not a normal way to live.
No, and you definitely can feel the disconnect, right? Because you're not sitting around a table talking about how shit the Pinsky file is because you're on the 30th floor looking out, and it's just a different conversation, and it's just that. They're the conversations you can only have with people that do the job, right? It's no different to, emergency services as well. Yep. The things that doctors and nurses joke about, while may seem morbid to some, that's their environment, right? Yep. I think people miss the point on that. And it's the same with us, the conversations that we have, no one will understand it. They look at us like we're just cretins of society. It's man, it's how we decompress, right?
That's right. Black humour, mate. We do it too. It's the black humour, mate. You got to have it, because otherwise, if you don't... Yeah, geez, we won't talk about that, but that's right. Black humour, it's what gets you through, and same for you guys. It's the black humour that you got to, and even in the most shittest situations, you still can make a joke of it. And people who aren't in those worlds look at you and go, "You right?
Yeah,
I'm good."
You look at that example specifically about coming home from their 48, 72 hours back at the Christmas table. I've read probably many moons ago, with the World War II vets, some of their coping mechanisms coming home, as some of those dudes spent 4 or 5 years on a front, right? But then they had a 4 or 5 month boat trip back. That time to decompress. I'm not saying they didn't have those injuries, but they had that time to decompress. And then you fast forward to modern day warfare.
Yep.
Dude can find himself on the battlefield and sitting at the Christmas table with his family. Same with the American drone pilots that go from dropping bombs, and the next minute that night they go. It sort of gives me where I get the appreciation for emergency services now. Is we get the luxury of being over there and then having those little moments, as short as they may be, and then you have like a police officer that, you know, he's dealing with domestic violence in midday, and then he's dealing with something else in the afternoon, does some paperwork, and then he's in an MVA with children involved at that night. Then he's got to go home and tuck his kids into bed later on, a couple of hours later. Like it's...
Yeah, you're definitely right, mate, and I think it's a great point you touch on there with, you know, something that defence had to learn as well along the process of all the wars that, you know, like, and, you know, our longest conflict ever, mate. Like, you know, they were learning too at that point. So of how to have that situation of, well, how do you decompress? You know, like, and as you say, like the World War II, and they did have a long, you know, they got on a boat and could have that time. You guys, you know, technology's grown so much that you're on a plane and bang, you're back in Australia. Yep. So you have Christmas at home, mate, and then you go back. And does anything else sort of happen in that 2013 over the winter period of that you can remember? Like, as I know,
there's a couple of close calls. Probably probably the highlight in that winter trip was we did a daylight raid on a drug lab, and I remember gearing up for it, and just before I got in the helicopter, someone tapped me on the shoulder and they're like, "Hey man, just let you know, there's like 400 guys on target." And I was like, "Fucking sorry, what?" I was like, "Is that a joke?" He's like, "Yeah, there's about 400 dudes on target." And we were the primary assault force going in. We were in the big CH-53 Stallions. They're fucking massive helicopters, huge footprint. You can hear them coming a mile away. And so we fly in. We've got the support of the Marine Air Wing. So they've got the Cobra old school Cobra helicopters and that, going with the CH-53s and a couple of Hueys. And so we land as the primary assault force, and we hit the compound fast. And it wasn't until the dust cleared. There was 400 dudes on target. It was like the fucking Benny Hill show. There was dudes going everywhere. And not they were all involved they were just like all standing around just watching what was going on, right? Dudes are running over each other. It was fucking crazy. And we get in the compound, and then one of the boys, they're throwing flashbangs over the wall as we make entry into this compound. And I peel straight, dude peels right. There's a guy in the middle of the compound, and I grab him, pick him up, and I've got my weapon system drawn, and I get him on the ground, and next minute we just hear this like whole heap of crack thumps, and the ground around us just erupts, like it's like the movies. And then next minute I look at the dude, and he's looking at me like, "Was that you?" And I'm looking at him like, "Was that you?" And then we're both looking at the wall like, "Who the fuck was that?" And then the Cobra helicopter goes through the middle of the compound. With its 30mm cannon, not knowing that we've hit the compound. He's seen the flashes of the flashbang and thought that they're firing from the inside of the compound out.
Oh, shit.
And essentially done a gun run straight through. So I had the closest one was probably about half a foot of 30mm, which is like, to give you an indication of what a 30mm is like. It's like...
Maybe a Coke can?
Maybe just smaller than a Coke can. Like, it's a big round. Like, it's huge.
Yeah, right.
And I remember the medic, he was like, "You're one lucky motherfucker, bro." He goes, "I saw every bit of that." And it ran through the snipers as well. So there was all little sporadic stuff like that occurred during the winter, but no huge big contacts. My TO got shot on our very last job with an engineer. If you go to the War Memorial, he's got his story there where he got fragged up. There was a dude with like a triple stacked magazine in a hole. And yeah, I was way too big for the hole, so I wasn't going in there, so I cleared the rest of the village. But yeah, there was all pockets and sporadic stuff, but definitely not as kinetic as the summer fighting season was.
And then, so you come back from that, and do you get a bit of a break in that period of, like, after you'd come back from the winter rotation in 2013?
Yeah, we get a bit of a break, and then I think we rolled on to the the Advanced Force Ops, so the online company. And then it was just a bunch of, like, we did Talisman Sabre, a couple of international engagements, went over to Malaysia. So there's always something that you're doing when you're across the road, when you're at two, whether it's even your stand down period will be you ticking through some courses that you need to do, you know. For me, I wasn't too bad because I'd already done some of those like NCO courses, so I didn't need to go and do sub 1, sub 2 for corporal and that. So it was just like a time thing for me till I got made up to Lance Jack, and then started to have a little bit more responsibility in that 2IC role.
Yeah, right. And then, mate, 2014, you deploy again
Yep.
back to Afghanistan, but in a
PSDs.
PSD role. And mate, this deployment you don't go unscathed again, and
Yep.
we'll get into that shortly. But this time you're in Kabul, and
Yep.
how is that being that you're not the kinetic side of, you're not actually outside the wire, but things, what was that like?
So before that, I'd cycled through a fair few. There was always as soon as you do your PSD course, you rotate through and you do a hyper short one. So whenever like Prime Minister, Minister of Defence, all those are key players, whether they're military or political, when they want to punch into any theatre of any type, then we'll take that over. So we hold that responsibility. So throughout my career, just done like a multitude of the short ones. Punch in 2-3 weeks, set the conditions, they do the visit, and then you come home. So I'd done a bunch before that, and then I was supposed to go on a bunch of courses, but the guy, it was actually probably around this time because it was the Mardi Gras time. They'd been a Mardi Gras night and fucked up on the piss. And one of the dudes ended up getting locked up.
Oh,
So I wasn't supposed to be on that trip. I come into work on during the week, and it was like, hey man, like you've been earmarked, you're going on this trip because old matey, he's been pulled off. He's got to earn his keep over the next 6 months, and he'll rotate on another one. So yeah, I wasn't supposed to be on it, and then next minute, found myself on that one. But it was apart from obviously what we'll talk about in a minute, it's quite structured. You're looking after one principal. There's 4-man team, 2 cars, and you're just kicking around and doing all those meetings. So it's somewhat high risk because it's Kabul, right? There's certain routes that you want to take, and there's some that you don't. Right near the back, it got a little bit hairy because we were sort of like had the responsibility, or our principal had the responsibility of the elections. So we spent a lot of time at the polling booth counting stations for about 2 weeks. So that was pretty fucking intense. But for all intents and purposes, like it's pretty cruisy around Kabul. Like there's obviously stuff going on, but I think for the most part, a lot of the NGOs and people kicking around Kabul don't even understand that there's actually a war raging down in the south, or was a war.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right.
And parties and yeah.
And as you mentioned, mate, this mission or this trip doesn't go unscathed. And, mate, a day that you will never forget is a good mate that you served alongside, Todd Chidgey, took his own life in 2014. And, mate, what do you remember of this day?
Yeah, what's there? I can't forget it, to be honest with you. Yeah, it was just like any normal day, right? Like it was a bit of a stand down. All the teams had their own like little rooms, right? And you set them all up with your bunk beds and your TVs and your Xboxes and stuff. And then over the trips, these things build up, right? Dudes are handing cash over because they bought X, Y, Z. So, these rooms are like decked out, man. They're like little home away from home. So. I was playing on that day in particular. It was just a stand-down period, and I was just playing Call of Duty with one of the boys. Todd was on the bed next to us. He was watching some weird movie like he usually does. He was a really cool dude, man. Like he was different, but he was cool. He was the type of dude that just would. I always enjoyed him because he always laughed at my jokes, and I can't tell a joke to save my life, right? And he would always just laugh. Yeah, he would laugh with me, and I'm probably a little bit but most of the time laughing with me. But yeah, he was he was on his bed just watching a movie, man. He was just like giggling and laughing away, and then he just disappeared. And then 20 minutes later, I get a WhatsApp message off my TL, and he's like, "Get to the team room now, like no duff, like." Fucking now, and I just knew from the message that it was like something had happened. Didn't even say anything to do. I was playing Call of Duty with one of my good mates, and then I just sprinted towards the fucking room. And I remember like having this moment where like the car passed me and I was just running through the lines, right? And then as I got to the room, my TL and my 2IC they'd already gone in, and my 2IC was coming out, and I was like, "What the fuck is going on, man?" He's like, "It's not good." They were out, obviously getting the car ready, and I came in, and there was his TL had him in his arms, trying to control bleeding, but gunshot wound to the head. I'm not going to go in the scene in respect for the families, but it was a lot. And it's one of those moments where you just like there's nothing you can do, right? It's one of those. It was an injury. There's nothing you can do. TL was good. He ran in. He's like, "Pick him the fuck up, get him in the car." And I was like, "Yep, cool." So grabbed Todd and we put him in the car. And TL looked at me. He's like, "Hey man, need you to secure the room." And for those that sort of followed the 3RAR story, many years before that, Jake Kovco and the incident with that, and suddenly found myself after the car had driven off, doors open, and I was like, holy fuck, like I'm that dude. Look, I'm that dude right now, right? And, for guys that follow that story, it was quite a lengthy investigation, right? So, yeah, I shut the door at this stage. At this stage, I didn't know it was self-inflicted. I thought, like, your brain takes you to a fucking weird place because I'm like, there's been a base attack. There's a dude rolling around on the base shooting people. And I think my TL and 2IC at this stage, they'd be like, yeah, it's self-inflicted. But for me, I'm just like... So then as you sort of settle down and calm down, then I was like, holy fuck, I think, there was a pistol on the ground, like, oh, holy fuck, like. So yeah, it was, I was standing outside that room for a while, man, before the MPs and the sort of the official stuff sort of built up, and then I was relieved. I think they kept me on there because it was the one person on there the whole time. So there's no ambiguity about tampering or anything like that. And then, I got the chance to be relieved and went down to the hospital. We got pulled into the room, and by that stage, they'd patched him all up and put him on all the machines. And yeah, it was like, hey man, you need to say goodbyes. So yeah, got to say goodbye, and that was it. Yeah, he was gone.
And that for you, mate, I thank you for sharing, because you and I'm nearly choking up actually. You'd lost your dad, so you'd seen what suicide looked like, and as you say, 20 minutes before, he was laughing and joking and watching a movie, and that whole, it takes away the whole thing of what suicide looks like, eh?
Yeah, especially, and that was what I really struggled with the most, was the two polarizing aspects of my dad, where it's like clear indicators and warning signs. I was too naive to pick them up. I was a lot older now, and like there was none whatsoever. I wasn't in the team, like I can't speak to that, but like we were mates, right? We hung out a fair bit, so, and there was no indication whatsoever from where I stood anyway. Yeah. And then going forward, it's just like, I've got like a stack of all the funeral services I've been to, and I've tried to get a hold of the guys that I haven't been of. Half of them are combat related, and half of them are suicide or PTSD related injuries from either medication or etc. Yeah, that one through. I guess that's where my outlook on individuals taking on their lives is a little bit different because of the exposure, right? Like, I say I've got a PhD in it, but I've definitely been exposed to both of the elements to it, and how raw it can be, and the second and third order effects that occur when someone does take their life. So my approach to it is quite direct when I've had mates that have found themselves in that situation, and I highlight the fact of, like, when you're gone, this is what occurs, and it's generational.
Well, it's the ripple effect is it's so big, and for you mentioned that the ramp service that they're never alone. Did you said your goodbyes and you had some time with Chigi before he was brought home, and sombering moment for you to just spend some time with him as well.
Yeah, and it was that thing. Like, if I look back on it, like, I had some conversations with him. I'm like, hey man, like, help me make sense of this, because it doesn't make sense, right? Like, show something to make sense of this, you know. So for how it all went, like, still to this day, I don't have the full scoop or the full story. It's not my business to know, unfortunately. But yeah, I definitely struggled with that one for a while, and that was coming home from that trip was the first time, I guess, I started to notice the cracks, and the more I tell my story, I'm like, oh yeah, I can, it's probably fucking understandable.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Well, mate, you've been compartmentalising it for so long, and down the road we're going to talk about, your transition out of defence and your moments as well. And now you're further on down the road, looking back, hindsight's, such a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
But at the time, you're dealing with you're doing the best with the information that you've got at hand, and that was what you were doing. And so you come back from that trip, and mentally you're not great, but you just compartmentalise and cracking on with the job.
Yeah, I don't think it was. I didn't know that I wasn't great. It was just, I guess, the cracks were starting to show. So I got back from that trip. Good mate, the one from selection and the one I had the handover with, we were living together at this stage. We had our little Commando little penthouse in the city, living the high life with the cars and the suits. And he was like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm going to go contracting." He got in the bug, and I was like, "Well, I'm not going to maintain this place." So before I went on that trip, I'm like, well, when I get back, I'm going to pack up the house. I'm going to move back with my old girl. Like, she's had a good slog, watching me bounce back and forth. And now time to, while I've got some downtime, I'll move back. So this is before all that stuff happened in 2014. But it was always on the card. So I got back, packed up the house, and I moved back home. And it wasn't until I moved back home where the first was the physiological, was that I started to have like panic attacks at night. They crept in. So this stage I was fitter than I was ever been. I picked up CrossFit. I bought a home gym, and that was me. I was like committed. I was like the career guy. So it was like gym all the time, 24/7. Saturday nights was my night to go hang out with the guys. But yeah, I just had this thing creeping in. So it wasn't even like I was like drinking or I had these bad habits. Like everything else was firing on all cylinders, but there was just a little thing at night that was creeping in.
And did you let anyone know that this was starting to creep in, or did you still keep cracking on?
The only one that knew was my old girl. I had this. I've told this story once before. I had this moment where my house was a 3-story house, and I had like the whole downstairs to myself. So it was like a self-contained apartment. So I was sleeping stark naked one night,
as you do, mate.
Out in Penrith, middle of summer, like it's fucking hot, right? So I'm starkers, and I have my first like proper panic attack. I wake up at like 1-2 in the morning. Cold sweats, my heart's at like 160, 170 to the point where I'm like I'm feeling it in my body, and I'm like, holy fuck, like I'm dying. I ran up 3 flights of stairs, which just elevates me even more, and I was like, hey mum, I need you to call 000. At this stage I didn't have a mobile, I didn't know where it was, but I was like, mum, call 000. And the first thing she was like, well, why are you naked? I was like, but it was that moment that like it was a distraction from what was going on in my body, and my heart rate just went back to normal straight away. It was almost like that fight or flight response had been kicked in, and it kicked me back into gear. And I sort of like ducked behind a piece of furniture, and I'm like, disregard, I don't know what the fuck's going on. And my mum was a social worker and a psychologist, and she worked in child protection and women's refuges her whole life. She's like, hey, I think you're having a panic attack. I was like, well, what the fuck are you talking about? She's like, yeah, and that was the start of them. They became more frequent through that year.
And are you, at this point, because you still want to deploy and everything, so you're just keeping, just as you say, just keeping on task and mission focused.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yep. Yeah.
So
this stage I'm 30. I had my 30th over in 24 hours. So I'm 30 years old.
Yep.
I'm just like, yeah, this stage I've done my free, like I've done my free fall course. I bought a parachute. Like I bought this fandangled car. I'm like, yeah, like this is me. Like you're living it up. Like, I'm living it up. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you're starting to have these night tremors. So night tremors, and they get more frequent as the years go on, don't they?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's happening, and then 2015, mate, you deploy to Iraq this time, and this ISIS comes into the frame now, and I want to really dive deep into this trip, because this is out of everything that you've done, this is probably the proudest deployment that you look back on fondly of your career, looking back.
Yeah, look, the gunfire and the kinetic stuff is definitely the job, but this was a trip where I was like, I knew that the impact that we were having on the battle space was like it was personal. Like the actions that we were doing as a small team were having a direct impact on the battle space in Iraq. So
let's talk about that, mate. I should mention too that you in 2015 you met your now wife, and then say see you later. I'm deploying
2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. How did she take that, mate?
Oh shit, we'd only just met. It was just one of those things, right? So we met, and we sort of Facebook stalked her and sent a few creepy messages, and she liked what I was putting down. No, she we just connected. Yeah, we connected straight away. She'd been over and she'd been doing the tour de force with the entertainment crew for the Defence Force. So she'd been doing that since like 2006. So there's a couple of moments where we had these sliding doors where we just missed each other. And I just missed her in Kabul by about 2 or 3 weeks, but the boys had sort of had this like quasi like PSD where they'd looked after them. They've been rocketed and stuff like that. But my best man by wedding, my best mate at the time, he was looking after her, and they ended up becoming good friends, and that's how I ended up like Facebook stalking her. Was on a post about the All Blacks one day, and yeah, we just hit it off, and I flew up to the Gold Coast. I saw her for a night, and then I was like, hey, I'm deploying. She's like, deploying? I'm like, yeah, I'm off. But it was good. It set the foundation for our relationship because we, we'll get into it. But a couple of months later into Iraq, I found myself in a quite remote patrol base, not much internet, one phone, and we were just like WhatsApp chatting for the whole, 4 or 5 months that I was deployed. So, it was one of those things where our relationship was purely based on communication at the start, and really got to know each other.
So that happens, mate, and then you deploy, and what, as you mentioned, like, what was your role over there in Iraq? Because at this point, because there is and there isn't, but what was the commando's role over there in Iraq in 2015?
Oh, look, probably Flangers was to lay it all out. He probably put it a lot better. From my understanding back then, it was just like when it all kicked off, everyone sort of went in and poached their own partner force that was likened to their own, I guess, capabilities, right? So the US Army and, the SEALs went and got the tribal forces, and then, and they also went up to the Kurdish, and they got those bad boys as well. But I think it was Langers at the time went in, and he sort of had a bit of a, he's just a fucking genius. Had a bit of a logical look on how they could affect the battle space, and the Iraq counter-terrorism service could move around quite liberally, and their agendas, with the Kurdish, they only wanted to take a certain line, and they wanted to take that back, and they sort of, once they got there, that's where they held. This is obviously my take on it.
Yeah, of course.
8 years later or whatever it is, but he ended up grabbing the CTS, and they ended up becoming the main manoeuvring force throughout Iraq. So you like all these big behemoths and these big machines, the Americans, suddenly you just had the Aussies mentoring the main fighting force throughout, Ramadi and Mosul. So that was, when I got in there, it was just before the Ramadi offensive, and I was essentially just meant to be a swinging dick. We'd had some new guys filter into the platoons from Rio, and it was just like, hey, you're going to go for like 2 or 3 months, and then we'll cycle through some new dudes to backfill. And I was like, yeah, no dramas. They're like, we'll start putting you through all your team commanders courses, supervisor courses. So I was only meant to be there for like 2 or 3 months. And because I was there for a short period of time, they didn't put me in a position where I was going to have a relationship. I was advise assist, so it was all about partner forces and relationship building. So to put me into one of those positions just for me to rip out 2-3 months later would be a bit of a disservice to whoever it was I was mentoring, right? So I sort of just bounced around. So I started off in Baghdad, did a little bit of training there, and then they were like, hey, can you head out to Al-Assad? And Al-Assad, back in the early Iraq campaigns, was one of the biggest air bases in Iraq. It's huge. It had been drawn down quite significantly by the time I ended up there, but what the dudes in the rotation before that had done is pilfer the whole base. So like it had everything that you needed for like a home away from home. Like got there, it was just like gym, had all the gym equipment you could think of. We had cooks, chefs, had our own rooms, showers. All the base security was already taken care of, so there was no pickets to be done. And then the partner force, the objective that they had was like Haditha Dam, and they had like a couple of objectives that they had to hold, but they weren't really doing like big campaign or big pushes. So we were just down there mentoring them and, just making sure that they had everything that they needed to stay in the fight, right? So up until that point, I was just like Rancho Relaxo. Like there was nothing for me. And then it all took a turn when the guys that were in just south of Ramadi, they were sort of assisting the ground force getting ready to do that campaign there. And they got rocketed one night quite hard. So the guys that were supporting their air assets remotely, they got rocketed. So they were embedded with the Navy SEALs in this like open camp, and then woke up the next morning to like photos of like, it was my TO who was there. Humvees rocketed, like how no one got killed, who knows? But that night they'd been backloaded back to Dubai and then re-rolled back into BDC. So it was through that little incident that everything got shifted around. The Ramadi offensive was starting to go in. At this stage, they'd started it and they were starting to get casualties. So they highlighted that it was taking too long for the Iraqis to get the care that they needed from the hospital, because they would go point of injury back to Al Taqadum Air Base on a whatever platform that the Iraqis had, and then back to Baghdad. So whatever intervention was put in place on the battlefield there would be what they had when they got to Baghdad, two and a half, 3 hours later, depending on when they could get the yellow in. So TL had identified that maybe that we could provide some med support. And then there was some other stuff as well that they were standing up, some sort of like some intelligence stuff that they wanted me to do. So I got the call up one night and they're like, hey, can you punch into, or one, can you extend your trip? I'd already put my hand up to extend. And two, do you want to go and do this role? And I was like, fucking put me in, coach. Let's do it. So yeah, I rolled in at like 10 o'clock at night with the medic that had come in from Baghdad. And that night we had our first casualty. And then that set the conditions for the rest of the trip. And I think we treated like 260 casualties over the next 2.5, 3 months, including civilians as well. So yeah, so it was pretty much treat dudes by day. We were also monitoring like the retrans as well through the ground force commander. So the communications went down from Baghdad. We were the retrans through there, so we'd man radio. So essentially treat during the day, and then I'd do some stuff at night with the computer, and then I'd man this radio till like 1 o'clock in the morning. So
yeah, right. And are you an advanced medic, or what was your, like? Obviously, you're on the medical side now. So were you advanced, or
no? So we didn't have the US guys, they do it pretty well. They've got the 18 Deltas, and then we've got our in-house medic. So the 18 Deltas are essentially qualified operators that go and do an advanced medic course. And then I'd done my combat first aiders course, and then you obviously do some more advanced stuff leading in as well.
Yep.
But nothing like what like the 18 Deltas do, right? Because you've got those in-house medics too. But the interventions that we were putting in place were just like, because obviously we were now looking at 1 hour post injury, so there was all these different types of stuff that needed to be administered. It was essentially like a backyard hospital. So the hospital that we had on base wouldn't only take casualties on certain bases, right? Injuries had to be severe enough. They wouldn't take spinal, they wouldn't take head injuries. So they would obviously get their intervention on the battlefield, sometimes suboptimal, and then we would either recorrect, reassess, triage, and then get them backloaded to surgery if required, or stabilise, get them patched up properly, and then get them on the helos. But then what I would do also is then I would sort of mentor the commander in the base on those, how to organise those air assets. Because essentially all they wanted to do was just wait to pile up the casualties and then put them all on the bird at once, trying to get them to understand that there's priorities that people needed to get on a helo now. You can't just wait till the next lot of casualties arrive if they've been hit, wait for them to arrive and then backload everyone at once.
Yeah.
So that was a difficult task in itself, and it pretty much got to the end of the trip. They had some new helos come online where I just had mobile numbers for Iraqi helo pilots.
Yeah, right.
For like the most serious dudes, and they would just come and pick these guys up like an Uber.
And would you do, so you do your like category, Cat A, Cat B, like what, is that how you triage your casualties?
Yeah, we do a triage. So essentially, like, you know, we were treating from 1 up to, I think our biggest day was 30 guys. So the trucks or the buses, whatever vehicle would rock up, and then the medic would stand at the door, he'd triage, and then we'd organise them in the... And as we went on, we like, you know, the first lot were a bit clunky, but by the end of it, we were just like this fucking well-oiled machine. You know, everyone was treating, like, everyone was doing stuff. Any of the advanced medical interventions that need to go in place would be supervised by the... either our medic, or we had like a really good US medic attached to the SEALs, but we couldn't always rely on them because obviously they had their own roles and responsibilities. So there were times where it was just me and the medic and another shooter.
Yeah, right.
Treating like 10 guys.
And are they, once you're triaging, are they getting flown to Baghdad, or where are they, or they just everywhere to go?
So we'd have to stabilise. They'd have a HQ next door, and then we'd essentially go in and be like, hey, we need a helo platform for this.
Yeah, right.
If it wasn't required, like if we had like a couple of dudes that were just like there's dudes we could stitch up, antibiotics, clean the wounds out, stitch them up. It's like, hey man, you're good to go. Others were obviously more, dudes are getting tubed, intubated, chest tubes. Yeah.
And then as you say, like, really rewarding trip for you in not so much the operator role, different type of, deployment for you. And for you, probably at this point, and I'm a good reset for you, do you think, of like with what had happened with Chigi and all that sort of stuff, like good reset and just back on the tool, like, but in a different role this time, do you think?
Yeah, it was probably that way up until we did a couple of days where we treated civilians, and that was probably it's different when you're treating soldiers in uniform. It's just like, it's not that you dehumanise that aspect, but it's part of war, right? Like. And we were a well-oiled machine up until the point where we got a call from the ground force commander one day. He's like, hey, the civilians are being targeted, like they're getting hit. We've got, I think our first lot was maybe like 8 or 10 casualties, civilian casualties. I remember the medic looking at me, and he's like, well, what do you reckon? And I was like, well, it's not like if we've got the capability here, like, and there's obviously some other complexities that come into there because there's obviously women, children, and then we've got, fighting age males as well. So like that vetting capability as well is null and void. But the first lot we got, I remember it was like we got like a 10-year-old. Yeah, it was a range of injuries, blast and gunshot. I remember I had this 10-year-old. He was shot through the stomach, and I never forget. He took it like a champ. Like he just rocked up on this table and just let us treat him, and like it was crazy. And I looked back later on in life where that compartmentalisation came in when Alira moved in with me with her son. He was 7 at the time, and I remember he used to hurt himself, and I would always take myself back to this moment with the 10-year-old. And it took me a long time to shake that because I was like, oh, you need to be tough. Like in my head, I'm like, you need to be tough like this kid. Dealt with a 10-year-old, the gunshot wound to the stomach. He took it like a champ. Like, it's just a little boo-boo, right? So we can talk about that later on. But yeah, that was like that stood out. And then the following day, we got a bunch of casualties. We had a guy missing an arm and a couple others, but we had a female. We had a mother come in with a teenage girl, and we couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. She had it was bits stuck in her left, right, and centre. It's like clothing burnt into her skin, and then when we finally got to the bottom of it, we'd found out that she'd set herself alight, so she couldn't be a child, like she couldn't be a bride. And obviously it's a female, with respect to the culture, but we're all dudes. We didn't have any female medics, but this, like, she was in pain, right? So we talked to the mother. We're like, hey, like if we have one person go in being the medic, we'll put up some curtains and we'll be respectful, and you let us know where we can go, and it's up to you, but we need to treat her. And yeah, the medic went in the room and started like treating her and started to get some of the clothes out of her. And I remember the screams were intense. Like she was in so much fucking pain. Even with pain relief, she was fucking in so much pain. And I remember I finished those 2 days and I looked at the medic, and some other stuff had gone on. It was starting to get a little bit, I guess, political, and we had to turn that part off. Thankfully, the civilian casualties sort of stopped. But I was just like, fuck. I remember finishing those 2 days, and I remember looking at the medic, and I was like, holy fuck, man, they were big days. And there's not, it wasn't the casualty numbers. We'd handled that before, but it was the emotional load. Like treating kids with blast wounds and frags all up their faces, and kids with gunshot wounds, and people are setting themselves alight. It was just like, now looking back on it, I get this appreciation of the impacts of war, right? As a soldier on the ground, you have your targets, you have your objectives, and you have your left and right of arcs, and yeah, the human element is massive. It's huge.
Well, mate, it's something that in our country we don't have that, like we are very blessed in our country that we don't have, and you've seen how other cultures, it's very different, mate. You've seen a very different lens, and how some people, when some people complain of how bad we've got it here, it's
that's crazy. And with the I don't want to get into politics, but the landscape at the moment is like the propaganda that was getting fed to us consistently over the last few months, and the dehumanization of life with what's going on overseas. It's just crazy. People giving excuses for both sides, and it's just like, nah, there's no excuse for women and children. I'm sorry.
I 100% agree with you, mate. And thank God, as you say, that element was turned off. And did that, because you extended your trip, so how long was that deployment in total for you?
It wasn't too long. It was only like 5 months. It wasn't the proverbial rock all 6 months. Yeah, so about 4.5, 5 months that trip. But it was like may as well have been 2 years.
But for what you'd done, and so you come back from that deployment, and are you, as you said, throughout the potty, you've compartmentalised things. Is this where things you can start to see the cracks, or is it still you're just mission focused, cracking on?
Yeah, no, I started to get really, like, the night terrors were creeping in, but I was suffering from really bad insomnia during that trip. Like, I would finish up that radio pick at like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, depending on what was going on, and then I'd stare at the ceiling till like 3 or 4 in the morning, and then finally my body would shit itself, and then I'd wake up at like 9, depending on what I had on the next day. And then, like, there was a little running joke that I was like a sleeping monster, but it was just like, I'd rather be called that than be like, hey, I'm having some fucking dramas here. So I was just writing it out, right? Because it was rinse and repeat every day. Especially when the offensive was on its peak, like, there were casualties every day, and in my head I was like, I can't afford not to be at my prime, so to speak. But yeah, it was definitely starting to take its toll by the end of the trip. But in terms of like I said, the career-wise, like, it sounds all morbid, but it was what I'd signed up for. Like, at this stage, I've got this massive beard going on. Like, we're rolling around in, like, it felt like proper first grade. Like, I had, like, assets, and, like, we were at this stage, because the CDS were like one of the main maneuver forces. The Americans are like, what do you need? And at this stage, they were like, because the VBID threat, the vehicle-borne IED threat, was so high, they were using these big, like, mining bulldozers to, like, clear a thin line of access, create like a moat, and then they'd clear, and then they'd do all that again. So VBIDs were just crumping these big D11, 10, whatever they're called, bulldozers.
What I used to operate, mate. Yeah.
And it was essentially like, we'd be like, hey, man, whatever you need. And we'd be like, I need fucking bulldozers. These things are like $500,000 a pop, right? And they're going through them like cornflakes. But it was an awesome trip. Like, I remember like I don't know if it was head of missions or someone come off a plane at night. But at this stage we were kicking goals in this medical space, and it was a force multiplier for the Iraqis. They were like, they knew they were going to get treated, so they what's the word I'm looking for? The motivation to fight was a lot higher. And you even saw it when you got dudes on the table, like, they would just drift off. You're like, no, yeah, man, you got to hold on. You got another, like, hour flight to Baghdad, right? So this guy hops off this plane one day. I think it might have been head of missions, and he's like, hey, man, like, you guys are doing a really good job. Keep it up, yada, yada, yada. We're a small team. We're like 3 or 4 dudes. There's, like, me, platoon commander, another shooter, Sparky, and a plumber, right? Like, and we're embedded with these Navy SEALs, this SEAL team. And he's like, if there's anything you need, like, what do you need? And for months I'd been like, hey, for about a month I'd been like, hey, I need some food. Like, at this stage we're living off, like, bacon and egg rolls in the microwave, ration packs, and American coffee. And it just wasn't sustaining us, right? Like, I was losing weight at a rapid rate. And he's like, if there's anything you need, like, what is it? I'm like, I need food and I need a truck. And they're like, oh, Roger, we've been driving around an old CTS truck, but they're like, hey, we need that back. So anyway, I get a call from my Bravo that night, and he's like, what the fuck have you done? And I was like, what? And he's like, did you tell him you needed fucking food? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I've just been given a call to fucking organise you food. And he's like, I'm going to send you fucking food. He's like, you better fucking eat it. And I was like, yeah, but I'm embedded with this like SEAL team. Like I can't just have fresh food. Like I need enough, you know?
Mm.
So I don't know if it was that night or it was probably 2 nights later. This C-130 rocks up. The fucking back ramp opens. The AGs fucking go and take their fighting positions. They're just like T-shirts and shit. I'm like, hey, boys, flex out. It's all good. Like, relax. And there's on the back of the truck's like a brand new F-150 and like 4 pallets of food. So I was just like, at that moment, I'm standing on the back of the ramp, bearded up with a bunch of Navy SEALs. The AGs are doing their thing. There's this truck, this food. And I'm just like, oh, this is cool as fuck.
Yeah.
Like, for some, that mightn't seem like much, but it's just like if you've been in the military, you know that's like it's a fucking big thing, right?
Mm.
So every 2 weeks, this plane would rock up with all this food. We had fridges. Like I became the proverbial cook. Like we'd treat during the day, and I'd make everyone spag bowl at night. And yeah, it was like I said, for even though it was taking its toll, like the trip itself was just it was everything that you want in that environment, minus the kinetic stuff, right? Like if we were kinetic as well, I would have just cream on the top, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So mate, you come back from that, and are you doing like are you full track at this point when Yep. So full track. So then you come back, and then, as you say, that's like great deployment, and then you roll into Tag East, mate, duties. Talk me through that, mate. Like that's
so that's 15 into 16. Then like a good chunk of leave, couple of courses, and then I was into the build up. So I did the build up for Tag, which is pretty fucking intense to validate for that. And then I was on team probably for about probably 4 months on team. And I had a parachuting incident the year before, and I bunged my shoulder up. I didn't realise at the time, but I dislocated it and it had come back in, so it was all torn up. And I remember I got to the end of Tag build up and I couldn't even flake a rope. And then I did the following year because I was just like, I'll just fucking ride it out. And it just never got any better. So I did a good 4 months on team. And I was just like, nah, shoulders fuck, man. I got to get this sorted. And off I went.
And for you at that point, mate, like you, as you say, you your shoulders fuck, so you got to get it fixed. And because I know, and injuries, mate, it can be a lonely road, and the recovery and the process to get back. Was that at that point? We'll get into you when you transition later, but was that at that point? Was that a hard road back to come back in after you'd had your shoulder operation?
Yeah. Like I said before, like I was the fittest I'd been, and I just transitioned that through, right? Like even as soon as we got the food in Iraq, like it was back to the weights, like it was good, right? So, I had the shoulder surgery, and then I had a bit of a reaction to the endo, and it really messed me up. I ended up back in hospital. It was almost like I was almost going into sepsis. Like it was crazy.
Yeah, right.
So I had to come off that, but I was in so much pain. That's when I started medicating a little bit with alcohol. Was unsupervised because I was on the recovery train. So I was out of the company because obviously Tag's quite intense. So I pulled me out of that. And I had a lot of time off. Wife was pregnant at the time. So eating a lot of food, doing the sympathetic pregnancy, but I was also like, because I couldn't take any painkillers, I was just drinking as well. Yeah.
So that happens, mate, and then you sort of, your career does a little bit of a, you go down to so you head to PTS, so Parachute Training School. And was that to have a break, or was like as you mentioned, you're recovering from the operation? Was that for a bit of a break, was it a break, mate?
It was supposed to be. So I got near the end of 2017. I stacked on a bit of weight, and I had that moment again, right? Like that moment when I was checking the dudes in para parade. It's like, hey man, you got to fucking sort your shit out. So I was like, I went head down again. So lost a bunch of weight because obviously as you're coming through the recovery thing, then you need to do all your gates again, your SVET, to tick the box to go back into the teams. So sort of like kicked my ass back into gear, and I was like, pull your head in, and lost a bunch of weight, and then passed all the medicals required to get me into the following year, because they're like, hey, we want you to do all of your courses to become a TL. And that's another almost like Rio in itself to tick off all those supervisor quals as a TL, because you need to be able to supervise all those skill sets as well as be able to run a team, right? So,
mate, we're talking. So you've just transitioned out and you're now at the parachute training school. And mate, what was, as we said, a bit of a break, or it didn't turn out to be a break?
Nah, it didn't. So leading up in that year, it was like I sort of flipped the script, because it was like usually you do your team commander's time, or your lower end team commander's time, and then you transition. I was like, hey man, like I need a break, I need a rest, I want to do a respite. To go to the parachute school, it's like, okay, cool, but you need to do all your courses, so that while you're down there, you can tick your sergeant's courses off. And for guys that don't understand, when you go across the road either side, is like you lose all your rank. So at this stage, I'd work myself up pretty much to corporal before I did selection, and then you lose all that rank again. You're starting again. So by the time I was full track, it's time to do my team commander's courses. Like all my peers in the regular army, they're all sergeants now. So it takes you longer to get there. So if you ever see like a dude who was a corporal in either unit, he's done some time, especially if he's done 5 to 10 years in the regular army, right? So I had to do all those courses. So it was back to back. So I did PSDs again into Iraq. So I did like the force projection commander, like the advanced commander, so the person that goes in and sets conditions. So I stayed in country for like a month and a bit, and they did all the cycles of visits, PM, Minister of Defence, Governor General, etc. And then I rotated straight onto courses. So I did my parachute jump master, so the TL jump master free fall course. Then I went straight into my, essentially it's like the gunfighter series. So you learn to do all your team commanders of like your urban fighting, close quarter fighting, etc. So you're taking the Rio through their courses.
Yeah, right.
So it's all overlaid, train the trainers type stuff. So you did that, and then I went straight on my jump master, my PJI for static line, and that was another like 8 to 10 weeks. So I just did back to back. And then it was time for my respite at the parachute school. So hit the ground running, and it's there's a lot of demand coming out of the training establishments, whether you're at the school in the schoolhouses doing any of the other capabilities, or you're down the parachute school. There's a high demand. You might be deployed, but there's a lot of load due to those training requirements.
So is that because the training school is that it's high intense? Like you're getting a lot of guys through. Are they coming through from their Rio? So is it essentially that's what you use?
Sometimes they are from over it. So it's both units, both 2 Commando and SASR are getting fed into the parachuting pipeline. So for the static line courses, it'll be the Rios from either, and then the free falls it'll be whatever gaps that they require in their capabilities. So it can be dudes that have spent 10, 15 years in the unit, or it could be guys fresh off the bat.
Yeah, right. And then so that happens, mate, and then the world shuts down. COVID the following year, mate. What was that like for you? And especially because it was a strange, those whole years was just strange times.
Yeah.
What was that like, especially being in an SF? Like, did training sort of come to a screaming halt, or what was happening?
Everything sort of did. So I got work that year, and then it got to the end of that year. Obviously realised it wasn't respite. And I was quite reactive. I looked at the missus before COVID and looked at my wife, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm so done. Like, I'm cooked. Instead of looking at for what it actually was, is maybe it was a little bit of burnout. I ended up putting my transition applications in. I went on leave. I got married to my wife, and literally the day after is when all the countries started to get shut down. So I had some stuff lined up. I'd sort of been a proverbial pest on LinkedIn and just started pestering people about what was in and around. Got some traction, got some legs, and then everything started to get shut down. So I got a call from my from the RSM, and he's like, "Hey man, like this is what's going on. CDF's got a directive that anyone has their transition paperwork in can pull it and come back." There's a whole bunch of other stuff I won't get into because we just blow out in timings. But long story short, I ended up coming back. Yeah.
And how I want to really touch on that piece, mate, because like you're checking out.
Yeah.
How is it to come back and go, okay, I'm green again, right? I'm on mission. And how was that mindset?
It was hard. I had at the time within the school itself, it was sort of mixed hats. So you had guys from SO Command units, and then you guys had guys from the regular units as well. And I had one major in particular that made my life made my life a bit of a fucking living hell, to be honest with you. And he sort of didn't get the concept that I could have come back, and said that early on that he didn't fucking understand, and we ended up butting heads and found myself in a little bit of hot water. But it was hard. I'd done a little bit of work I got an approval to do work for like a bunch of landscapers that had pivoted into COVID sanitisation. So I started helping them build training packages and courses. They were essentially like military lessons, like it was all about high frequency touch points, but they threw a lot of money at it. It was a big investment. So I was like working with like virologists and all these dudes, all these boffins who like knew everything about what was going on. And then I came back and there'd been all these RMPs and risk mitigators put in that were totally against what I'd been building for this fucking company. And I was like, hey, like, you're doing some retarded shit here. Like, but it was like in one ear, out the other. So it was a bit of a head fuck having to come back, sort of like transitioning in my head out, getting myself ready for civilian life. And then obviously COVID coming in. But it was, in the end, it was a blessing in disguise, because I hadn't really, like a lot of dudes, I'd been quite reactive in getting out. Not to say the second time I had a crack I didn't mess it up, but in terms of like gainful employment and sort of trying to set my family up, I was quite reactive in that first push.
And so you pull your discharge, and then so how much longer do you stay in after that initial put your discharge in?
So I do another year.
So you do another year?
Another 12 months.
And then you find, and then you make the final call to say, yep, I'm done.
So 2020, married 2020, yeah, so I do another 2. So I do another 18. So I extended the school for another year for the following year.
Yeah, and then, so that, and at that point, because your families, are they with you at this point, or are they not with you?
No, so so this was another one. I was unaccompanied. So when I went back to the school, I'd moved my family back up to the North Coast. So I came back unaccompanied. And during COVID, it was fucking hard, man. Like they were on the northern New South Wales side of the border, but I couldn't fly into Queensland without exemptions, etc. It was, so I had to fly into Ballina, and flights were outside of the already 6 flights that you get. It's not enough to go and see your family, right? There was a whole bunch of stuff that happened there. My wife had a miscarriage during that time, and I was unaccompanied. But that was probably where I sort of started to develop those poor habits. I was probably drinking a little bit too much in the live-in lines to get to sleep, but found that happy balance between what I needed to get to sleep and what I needed to function at work the next day, which probably wasn't conducive to,
Well, isolation's not great either, mate. No. And that's you want to be with your family, and so you're in the hurt locker, and so then you make the decision in 2022 to transition out of the army. And for you at that point, because you joined in 2006, and that's a lot of time. And that's all you've known. And this is where I really do want to deep dive into your transition, because transition's hard for anybody. How hard was your transition?
Yeah, it was. It's for anyone. It's hard, right? Like it's and there's not a cookie cutter solution. Everyone's different. They've got their reasons for leaving and what's going on. But especially for SOCOM soldiers, operators in particular, there's such a process to get in. In terms of vetting for you psychologically, that on their way out, you can just walk out the door, right? Not making sure a dude's okay to be stepping out the door. For me, I'd hit this point. Obviously, we're in a climate where things are changing within special operations. There's a lot of heat going on, and I'm looking down the barrel of going back to the unit to assume a team commander's position. I've chipped through my, I've started my sergeant's courses. Like I'm ready to go to the next step. And for guys, you've had interviews with guys that have gone to that level, like it's the next step, and there's a sacrifice that occurs, both physically, mentally, and then in the family dynamic as well, especially guys that are good at their job too. And at this stage, like I'm starting to see someone outside of work. The cracks are starting to show. Having problems within my marriage. I'm probably drinking a little bit too much. At this stage, I've moved my wife down to try and mitigate some of that, and then the physical element as well. Like I'm starting to limp off the drop zone at this stage. Like I'm fully qualled up. I'm doing all the high altitude stuff. You're wearing the big parachutes. You're checking oxygen. Like there's a lot of responsibility and load on yourself to make sure that, students and the jump masters not only have the CACs right, but, no one's going hypoxic in the plane at that height. So, I'd finish a jump and I'd just limp off the DZ. Like I was in a fucking lot of pain. And I guess I had this moment where it was like, I'd come home and I'd be like, I'm meant to go back to this unit and I'm meant to be combat effective. Like I have to be, and I'm not firing on all cylinders. Like everything's sort of falling apart around me, including my marriage. So yeah, it sort of got to this, like, it just got to this moment where all these things were happening. The cracks were showing. I was having like little small like arguments at work that were sort of out of character. And then I went home one day and I said, I think I'm done. But at that stage, I should have started to highlight the issues that I had going on, instead of just being like, no, I'm okay. I'm just getting discharged. And that's what I did. What a lot of soldiers do. They just, don't get things logged and they just bounce.
That happens, mate. And now this is where I really, for you, this transition was hard. And if you can, share us how this transition, and why it was so hard for you.
Yeah, I guess it's the reason why it was hard is because there was one element where I made it hard for myself. I didn't make sure I had my own checks and balances. There is a level of self-accountability right here where I didn't make sure there was the checks and balances to make sure that I was good on separation. For other dudes it might be, they want to make sure they go get a degree or whatever, right? So for me, I didn't have, emotionally and physically didn't have the ducks line up to separate. I was just like, I want the cleanest path to separation as possible, and that's just to say everything's fine and I want to fucking leave. And that's what I did. So, within me walking into the office to be like, hey, I'm done. 2 weeks later, I'd handed all my shit back and, the house was getting packed up and we were moving up north, right? So, and then when I got up there, it was all right at the start, and then I remember the floods. The floods came in northern New South Wales in 2022, and at this stage I'd transition out. I was working in operations for a private protection company. That was pretty busy. It was just drawing back up after COVID. Like they'd gotten rid of all their workforce and it was essentially like a 2-3 man army, right? And that was enough of a distraction. But then I started to notice like things were creepy. Like I couldn't sit for long periods of time. I couldn't stand for long periods of time. And then the floods came in, and I'd been seeing some psychs, and then I'd been seeing psychologists, but then I went and saw a psychiatrist, and then everything was starting to fall apart. And I just remember the floods hit. We got trapped in, and I had this appointment, and I remember sitting in the garage, and that's when it's the first time I'd had the labels thrown at me, PTSD, anxiety, and all of that, because obviously I'd been having the night terrors. So yeah, that's when all the labels started to come on, and for guys, they've sort of been in it. Once you sort of hear that label, it's sort of like you have this moment where it sort of defines you. And I remember thinking to myself, the floods were on, and said to my boss at the time, hey, can I get the work truck and just go help some people for the day? And I remember just burying my head into that situation. I linked in with a guy. Yeah, his name's your mate Benny on Instagram.
Good bloke.
Good bloke, man. I ended up catching up with him. People were doing all their thing with the rescues, and we sort of went like off to the side. He was organising helo assets. Found some some 20-year-olds that had Land Cruisers and boats and stuff like that, and Hester Russell helped us out with getting donations to try and buy all this equipment so these kids could go and do these search parties, because for guys that remember the floods, it took a long time for there to be organisation to go and do search and rescues and stuff like that, defence to react. Before that, it was just the community and this little sidearm that we had. So I just buried my head in that. So I'm chipping through my leave, and I remember I had my separation date on one of those days. And I remember like having this moment where I was like, holy fuck, like that's it. It's done. And guys will understand whether, it's not just military, it's any job that's been in your life, first responders or anything like that, or people that have been in something for a long period of time, athletes, sports, is like when you have that defining moment where like it's done and it's been your whole life, you have this moment where you're like, okay, cool, like where's my purpose? What's my identity? And like what's the community and the tribe look like that I have now? They're the three pillars that people need in their lives. Yep. And there's all little sub elements underneath those, but I was like, in an instant, like there's this sadness, like loss that you have. And I had it during this moment of like doing all these, like coordinating these search and rescues and that, where I was filling a gap and a void, because it was like I was spinning up all these little operations with these kids and hanging out with Benny, that I was just like, man, I'm distracting myself from what's going on right now. And then it sort of just went from there. It sort of was like, I was drinking a fair bit. My relationship with my wife was falling apart. I definitely it was just lucky I had the support of the boss I had, because he was Troy from Panoptic, because he was a ex-vet himself, so he was watching, and I was quite honest with him. I'm not okay. There's times where I'm like, I'm struggling here, bro, and he did his best efforts to create a working environment that was conducive to what was going on in my life.
Another good human. I've met him too. Yeah, another good human being.
Yeah, really, really good dude, like those guys. And it just compounded. It just kept compounding, because I wasn't recognizing. And one of the biggest things was I was trying to bury my head in this job that I had, this work, and everything else around me was falling apart. And it sort of got to the moment where I was like, I need to stop. That odd pause, right? I need to stop. Like I can't keep doing this to myself. Like I'm falling apart. And I'm just plugging
physically and mentally.
Yeah, I'm just plugging the holes to these ships, and there's more holes bursting out everywhere. So and it's really hard for the ego to be like, well, I need to stop. Because it's like, once again, it's like, well, I'm trying to find purpose in this thing where I need to turn that off.
And that's the mindset of you being an operator, mate. Like you fix you don't run away from problems. You fix them, and that's for you. It's hard to go, oh shit, okay. And this is what I want to break this down a bit, mate, because at that point, did you realise that you needed help, and how hard was it to you to say, hey, I need help?
At this stage, I'd been seeing a psych for a period of time, right? Like I was doing the things, doing the talk therapy, but it was just like I just couldn't piece it together. Like I didn't have the mechanisms required, and it was just like, it didn't matter. The one thing I found with it, especially the talk therapy, is because we compartmentalised so much, there was no emotion in when I was going through the talk therapy. So I had the ability to talk about all of these, just like I did today. These traumatic incidences are easy to talk about because I have the ability to separate myself from them, distance myself from the story. Like I'm talking I'm talking about someone else's story or something I've read in a book. So I'd got to the stage where the psych's like, hey, like we need to stop here, because it's like and it was all by I had created a relationship on like a telehealth thing. Because the in-person stuff wasn't well. The people I was interacting with in person in work, down in Nowra, I was seeing someone that was just, there wasn't a connection there. So I had a therapeutic connection, but because it was dislocated, I had the ability to distance myself. So I wasn't actually working through my shit. I was just telling my story. Telling my story like I am now, right?
Yeah.
And it was just compounding, but it wasn't until I stopped, and then we ended up moving to Tasmania, where it was like I really had those introspective moments, because there was no distractions anymore, and I had time in my own head to unfuck whatever was going on. and they're not going anywhere. They haven't gone anywhere, but it just gave me the moment to have that quiet, just to try and fucking organise the chaos that was going on up there.
And for you, it's that process of you now have the tools that when you are slipping, you can go to those tools to go, okay, I'm not going to slide. I know how to. I know the signs, and you've got the tools and the knowledge now of knowing how to live alongside what was going on in your head.
Yeah.
And for you, one of those things was your faith, and this is where we're both very faithful. How important has faith been in your recovery to where you are now?
It's been massive. It's been huge. Yeah, it's been huge. Like I'd lost. Like I said, I wasn't super religious, but I'd been exposed to it all my life. I'd always gone to Catholic schools. Like it was integrated and it was a part of me, but I wasn't anchored into it like I was now. And then I remember when I was in Iraq in 2015, it was after we'd treated the civilians. Like I was just in this state where I was just like, what the fuck? What is wrong with the world? What is wrong with the world that that you would impose this onto another human being? I remember the Padre at the time, he was an American Padre. He came down and went to sit next to us, and was something like Blessed Day or something, boys. And we'd interacted with him before. And I just looked at him. I was like, God left this country a long time ago, Padre. But I said it in such a way that he walked off, like it was almost said in malice. It was just like I was angry. And it was funny, like I got back in 2016, and it was almost like, even though I'd been in my life, it was, I'd been watched over and protected, but then I just turned my back on him. Like I just completely turned my back on him. It was just like from 2016 up until like 2022, it was just like all this shit just happened in my life. All this fucking shit. From the minute I got back from Iraq and leave 2016, slapped with this like unacceptable behaviour complaint retrospectively from like 5 or 6 years ago, and it just set the tone up until I got down to Tassie, and my wife and I were like, it was a chain of events that occurred, but one of them was it was a Sean Ryan show. It was a Kyle Morgan, like badass, like hitting mother effer. Stormed a hotel in South Africa by himself, took out a bunch of dudes. But after he does that, he just has this like chain of events. He stays in theatre. He's got some shit going on. He has some infidelity things. He's like gets home. He's like taking drugs. Drives with his daughter, like he just like the story's insane, and the whole time his wife is like anchored into faith that she's like gonna get Kyle back. I remember I was listening to the podcast in the car, and he just talks about his journey back to faith, and how turning back to God. And it was just like I remember I got home and I looked at my wife and I'm like, hey, I think I'm gonna explore my religion again. I don't know what it looks like. It's not like the Roman Catholic form, but she's like, oh my God, like she's like I've been. And the line of work she's in, she's around a lot of Americans and women of faith, and she'd been talking to a couple of those about like her anchoring back in and how she's going to get me to see the light and stuff like that. And she'd been praying herself, and then she's like, oh my God, she's like, I've been talking to women about this, and here you are. Like she's like, let's do it. So anyway, that wasn't the enlightening moment that sort of turned me back. So it's what is it now? Mid 2022. I go up to my old work for like a Christmas in July party, and I get delayed in Sydney, and I rip in. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll just go to the Virgin Lounge, have a couple of beers, and then by the time I get to this party, I'm like pretty touched up. And Ben, who you've had on before, is like, man, you look real jolly, bro. Like you're like, so yeah, ended up going full gear. And ended up having one of the old operator mates. He ended up meeting up with me at Currumbin, and then I ended up crashing at his place. But I was meant to stay at my brother-in-law's place, and then I was meant to drive a van back down to Tassie. And next minute I wake up at 6 a.m, and I've got all these missed calls from my wife, and she's like, where the fuck are you? Missed calls from my brother-in-law. And that was when my wife's like, all right, enough is fucking enough. Like, get your fucking ass in that car. And so, yeah, next minute, Queensland to Tassie's a long drive. And it was just me and my thoughts in this drive. And I walked into the kitchen, I was anchoring into my newfound faith. I'm like, oh, I need to fucking take this serious. So, I prayed. I just sat in silence for a lot of it, just with my own thoughts. And I walked through the door and kissed my wife, and I was like, I promise you, like, I'm not going to be the same man anymore. Like, I promise you. And yeah, 6 months, I put the bottle down. I didn't touch a drop. You see on my social media, I had all the ice baths. And the ice bath was more of a punish thing than anything. And I just had these healthy habits for like these 6 months to try and like sort my shit out before I lost it. Before I lost it all.
And that's a scary tightrope to walk, mate, because a lot of guys have lost that. And for you to realise that if I'm not careful here, I'll lose everything that means the world to me. And you mentioned your beautiful wife, and she is absolutely... I follow both of you guys, and she's just an amazing human being as well. They say, mate, behind every great guy is an even better woman, or as most people, an angel. And how important has her support been in the road back to where you are now?
Yeah, massively. Like she... It's that whole thing of like exhaust all possible options, right? Like you hear of like, the divorces and the suicides, and she took so many proactive steps to ensure she had the tools to try and deal with what was going on with me, to the point where she was going to do a whole career shift, right? She worked in like, when I met her, she was a model, TV presenter. She had her own like aspirations, and then we decided to have children, and she's working in the medical realm for a little bit, and then she started to do courses on PTSD and trauma, and like she went down a whole like a whole different pathway than she ever expected, to the point where she ended up starting a counselling and psychotherapy diploma, just to be like, and then she found a passion in it as well, and she found I found a passion for veterans too. Her time in the entertainment crew, like she's always had a soft spot for veterans, and she was like, I want to help you, but I also want to help families like us, because they shouldn't be statistics. They don't have to be, right?
Yep.
She found some issues into that realm. There's a lot of politics that goes on with veterans organisations, and she, tried to dip a toe into those waters, and she was bitten quite hard, which was pretty sad, to be honest with you, because I think she would have value added to that community. But it was good because she took another career turn, and she's absolutely crushing it. But yeah, just that exhausting all the possible options. She's like, I'm not going to be a statistic. I'm going to go and learn about this to see how I can better deal with it, and how she could introduce some of that into my logical brain. Instead, she's quite spiritual, woo-woo, I used to call it back then. But she brought some like really cool authors of books, Joe Dispenza, like people that can like really frame that space in a logical and scientific way on how trauma and those things can affect the body. And it's not so much about the traumatic incidences like the gunfighting and the exposure or whatever, but for a lot of dudes, it's the deconstruction of military life as well. I talked about those pillars and how you can deconstruct those to try and live the normal life for a guy that joined at 17 and gets out at fucking 45 years old. Just like, huzzah, bro, you're a civilian, And for me, I was like, I'm a shit civilian. I said it to my wife. I'm like, I'm a really good soldier, but I'm a fucking terrible civilian at the moment.
And that's the biggest thing. Like, and this is the thing for defence, is they spend so much making you a soldier. They're shit at transitioning you out. I'll say that. They are shit at saying at the end, like, there's no rule, like, they're great at turning us into soldiers, but they're shit at that transition piece out.
And I remember when I had my transition officer give me a call. He's like, hey, it's Warrant Officer so-and-so. And I recognised the name, and I'm like, you're a warrant officer when I left 3RAR 2011. Like, yeah, it's just like you're not the right person's not dealing with the right person to understand that, and like they get right to the end and they're like, hey, Corporal, what could have we done to keep you? And it's like, bro, you asked that question like a year ago.
Yeah, nothing's changed.
Nah, and they were like, there's a lot of retention problems and they're trying to throw money at the bro. It's just like, man, like, there's no proactive step to ensure that, an individual's nurtured. And especially the US do it really well in terms of how they provide contracting services back to defence. They actively go out looking for companies that recruit straight out of defence, instead of having this approach where it's like we need to stop dudes from exiting the workforce and going to work for these companies and putting a time caveat over the top of that, they should be fostering those relationships so that the person gets out. They're not necessarily tied to the green machine anymore, but they're actually giving back, and probably giving back in a more productive and efficient manner because they're happier.
100%. And two, they've been in the shoe, like they know the, you know, like they've been out on those stomps, and they can help improve for the next generation that are going through. Like, to me, it's, you know, it's logical to go, hey, we want to keep you guys, and they're investing millions of dollars in all soldiers. Like, you know, it's just, all right, see you out the door. Like, it's like they spent years training you up, mate, to be, and like you say, that transition piece out. It's, yeah, like, there's still a lot of work to be done in that space. And for you, I want to highlight this as well, is that, you know, you had support. Like, there's guys that and girls out there that don't have the support that you had. And for you, you'd seen a lot of, like, your dad had taken his life. You've been around you've lost a lot of mates through. Did it get dark for you as well? Like, did you think there's the option to, or that pain of what you'd gone through with your dad, did that sort of stop you from not going down that path?
Yeah, I mean, your mind goes to some fucking weird places, right? So it's like the idealisation of being like, you just want the fucking pain to go away. You'd be stupid to think that like that doesn't pop into your head. But I'd been exposed to it so much and seen the effects of it in a wide variety of spectrums that it was just like I couldn't bring myself to do that to the people around me, because I've seen and I've felt the pain of that. And like I said, guys that are, you know, that have not the proverbial talked off the ledge, but it's just like, hey man, like this is what happens, and I know this happens because I've been a part of it, and I've seen it, you know, from incident site all the way through to, you know, family member, right? Like all spectrums. The guys that have had the overdoses, the guys that have taken their life, like I said, half the pamphlets in my little trophy, or my war cabinet, you know, half a suicide, or incidences involving things that have accumulated from their mental health. So to answer your question, like, you know, my mind's gone to some dark places, like 100%. But you know, could I bring myself to fucking do that? No, like, you know, and the world needs you, like, regardless of whether you think that it does or not. Like, you bring something to this world, and you need to find that potential of what you bring. You know, I guess that leads me like, what do I bring now? And it's just like telling the story that, you know, I remember talking to my psych once, and she's like, well, what do you want to do now? And I was just like, well, you know, I want to be the best version of myself, but I have all this experience in this realm that I don't know what to do with it. To overlay and put it in a way and package it to be like, hey, I have an experience of mental health, and this is the impact that it has. Not just like the pat on the back, here's the warning signs, like the proverbial study year brief of like what this, you know, what to look for of someone that's going to do that. It's like, man, that goes out the window. Like, it's not a cookie cutter solution.
No, and I like that. Sorry to cut you off, because I know you're passionate about it, as am I, and you've dived so deep into that space now of helping, you know, people with mental health. And mental health's such a big problem. It's so, you know, years, like, you know, 10 years ago, it wasn't as, like, if you put your hand up to say, hey, I needed help, there was a stigma, and there's still a little bit of that attached, but it's getting better, and it's because of people like yourself coming forward and saying, hey, it's okay to be vulnerable and say, I'm not okay and I need help. And there is light at the end of that dark tunnel. You can come out the other side, and you have done that. Yeah,
and it's, yeah, like I look at a lot of the stuff around at the moment, especially post-COVID, there was a lot of those NLP guys transition into those neuro-learning, but whatever it's called. They're like, a tradie goes into, like, you know, they take dudes into the bush and they scream and they yell and they get that. And I'm not saying that doesn't work for some people, but when you look at the concept of, like, you pull a group of men together and they do something collectively and they feel good and they go on, it's not so much the action of, like, going out of the bush and beating up a pillow. It's like you've brought a bunch of people in to try and alleviate some stress in a community environment. So they've got sort of that one pillar. I forgot where I'm going with this.
I think, like you're saying, that there's that's a pillar, but there's other as you say, mental health is so complex that there's not one cookie that and what works for you and me, and we're very similar in I love ice baths as well. I do them regularly every week because I know what they do for my mental health and the cortisol and everything that's pushed around your body. I love doing them, and people go, "You're mad." And I did one the other day, which probably represents what your ice baths in Tassie. I did half a degree, and it was for 6 minutes, and it was amazing. It was so good. People are like, "You're nuts," and I go, "But you and I are very similar in that sense." Some people don't like ice baths. Some people don't like motorbike riding. And every talk that I give, whenever I'm given an opportunity, I say to people, find what works for you. You've got to find in your little toolkit what you've got that you can lean on, because we're not all the same. Like you and I, we enjoy ice baths. Other people don't. You find what works for you.
Yeah, and it's anchoring into that. It's all about those habits as well. Providing those habits that give you that moment to rest and digest. Like get into that homeostasis where it's like, increase the heart rate variability, drop the rest rate, drop your heart rate, like really like get into that state where you're like that flow state where you're completely calm. And whatever that looks like is different. For my sister that's going for a surf, for me it's the ice bars, and for someone it's meditation. It looks different. You just find that thing that gives you that moment to have that quiet time to try and just clear some of that energy.
And the noise that everyone's got, that and I often say it too, mate, is I go and I ground myself. So you look around a lot of the places now that it's all concrete. Yeah. Like I go out and take my shoes and socks off, and I'll just feel the grass, and I often say it to people where trees they're rooted to the ground. There's a reason we need to get centered, and people think that it's all woo-woo, and it's not, mate. Like, no. I know exactly what you're talking about because I've had to do that work myself, and you do realise that you're on frequencies and vibrations, and that's, if you're in a lull, you're in a shit vibration. If you want to get back to a high vibration, you got to go and find that vibration, and that's the thing, and I think, just for people out there that are struggling, or you find what works for you, and not everything is, you're not always going to, it's not always going to be a clear, this is what works, this is the way, and it's not always, mate, I know myself, I still have down days, you probably still have down days too as well, and that's okay. Yeah. Well, it's bringing that forward as well. When people talk about grounding and clearing the head, that's one thing. But sometimes it's giving yourself the opportunity to bring whatever it is forward to try and process that, right? And, that whole compartmentalising, there was the last couple of years has just been that deep work to try and bring some of that stuff forward, see what it means, acknowledge it's there, and then file it in a more conducive manner than just locking the box. Yep. So that when it comes forward, I can acknowledge it, especially for the Afghan fighting season, where you start seeing all the anniversaries roll through. It's a big one for a lot of us. All the anniversaries will start to roll through, and then you start seeing dudes pop the memorials. I put them up myself, but it's just now I sit with that. I remember that day. I remember that moment. The chats that I had, or the relationships that I had with that individual, and really sit with it, and then let it go and file itself instead of locking it and trying to push it back in the bellows of wherever it come from, just for it to fucking sporadically and pop up and bite me on the ass later on. And that's a good way to look at it, and I like that you'll never forget, mate. You'll never forget. These guys, and as you say, you've served with some amazing guys, and for you, you're in Tassie, you're in beautiful Tasmania, and you now, as you say, you still do your ice baths regularly, you exercise, you're doing your faith, and how did becoming a father change and help in your recovery as well? Was that a big part of the piece of, you know, like, and being a dad's probably, I'm not a dad, but I'm an uncle, and it's pretty cool. But being a dad, that'd be pretty special too.
Yeah, it is. It's yeah, that whole thing, like where I keep saying, like I work to be the best version of myself, you know, not only for me but for the ones around me, especially my boys. And I saw the impact that the, you know, pre-transition and then post-transition, the impact that it had on my stepson Jai, and you know, he was old enough to see some of that stuff, you know, with my wife, and you know, like he saw that degradation of our relationship and the stress that I was having, and I wasn't necessarily the best dad to him. And I sat with him. He decided to move back up. You know, teenagers in Tassie, he doesn't really mix, but he decided to, you know, I had him from 7 till almost 16, and he decided to move back up with his dad. But before he went back up, we were back up north, and I sat on the beach with him, and you know, it's this whole thing about, you know, you can be vulnerable and, you know, find this happy balance with like trying to deal with your shit, be vulnerable, but if you still want to hold that stoic and masculine stature, you can within your household and your relationship and your kids, right? Like coming from an Italian family, everyone's stoic. No one really gives you much. But I sat down with him on the beach, and I was just like, hey buddy, you know the last few years, like it's not been okay. That's not okay, and that's not how I should have handled what went on and how I should have handled my own stress. And essentially, you know, to say that to your 15, 16-year-old boy that you've had for 8, 9 years, like it was difficult, because it's like I still want to be able to hold that stature as his dad, but I need to tell him that this is not okay, you know, and I was anchoring him from my aspect of faith as well. Like I wasn't acting accordingly, you know, that what I should have as the keeper of my household, my kingdom. So yeah, that one was a really tough one. That sort of set the tone with like how I interact with my, you know, my other two boys, and I still interact with my boy, but he's just living up the north coast. But yeah, that one was a difficult one, but it was also a turning point where I was like, okay, well, it doesn't need to be like this moving forward. I change from now. That's not to say I'm not perfect still.
No
one
is,
I have
mate.
my moments as a dad. But yeah, it did change my perspective, because I was like, yeah, that whole thing where it's like you got to break the chain. You know, I hadn't, the intergenerational trauma is coming from me now. It's not from, you know, everyone has their own childhood and their own experiences and the things that they pass down, but all the things that I've been exposed to, not one human, you know, there's dudes in my realm that have been exposed to a hell of a lot more, but for one human compared to the average, it's a fucking lot of load and a lot of trauma, right? So I recognize that I need to break the chain, because if I continue the way that I do, I'm just going to pass all that down to my kids, and they're going to wear the brunt of that. And then, you know, where I've got to break that chain, and I work my ass off to do that, right? Like
100% you do, mate. Like every single day, mate. You see it on socials. You know, and I've always had a thing, mate, where the word perfect, I hate it, because no one's perfect. There's a human error, and it's something that you live by out at the regiment, mate. That daily renewable contract. Doesn't matter how good you were yesterday or how bad you were. Today's a new day. You get, you know, every day we wake up, mate, is a blessing. We get a new opportunity, and we can strive for excellence, but we're never going to be perfect. And that's just how I hate that word. It should never. Never. You know.
I got a couple of slogans that sit up on a whiteboard, but one of them is like, tomorrow's not guaranteed, so you better make it count.
Yep.
You know, so that sits up there with a couple of verses that I have, but yeah, that's in bold down the bottom of my whiteboard. Tomorrow's not guaranteed, so you better make it count.
And that's, mate, I often do that every morning. Like I'm grateful I just always 20 minutes in the morning, just have 20 minutes of complete silence and just thank God every morning and just say, thank you. It's another blessing that I'm here today. And I often, I did it today on the way down to catch up with you. I called in to get some fuel, and I said to the lady, how are you? And she goes, oh, yeah, I'm all right. And I said, well, any day you're above ground's a grateful day. You know, it's better than the alternative. And she sort of was stunned and just looked at me, and I'm like, tomorrow's not guaranteed. Yeah. Like and so many people just go through life going, oh, you know, I'll just wake up tomorrow. Well, you might not. Yeah. Like, and I think, yeah, it's something that I often say, mate, is that, just take every day as a blessing. It really is. And even in the shit days, it's still a blessing because there's a lesson to learn from that shit day. Yeah. And so, mate, I've got a few final questions before we finish up, and I'm glad that we really touched on that and deep dived into that, because it's, as you say, no transition is easy, and 16 years, that's all 16, that's right?
Yeah, coming on 6.
Yeah, 16, so 16, 17 years, that's all you'd known, and especially from a young age too, like, as you say, mate, that was you. That was the military, and it's not. So I'm really glad that we deep dive into your transition, and as you say, it's still, you're still evolving that transition now. Like, you're still working on yourself every single day, and I see that. And for you, mate, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
Definitely not. He definitely would not listen. One of them would be like, enjoy the moments, like they go fast. That would be one. That would probably be one thing that I listen to. The second one would be, life's going to get tough. You're going to have some hard moments, but know that, like, that God hasn't given you this. Like, He's not going to give you anything that you can't handle. And that probably one I wouldn't have listened to, but it would have made more sense in life. But yeah, God doesn't put things in front of you that you can't handle. And, I look back on my time and I'm like, I've been able to, like, I'm okay here. There's a version, I always tell dudes that are in the thick of it, there's a version of yourself looking back telling you it's going to be okay. And that's, for that period of time and all the hard times, the version of me now is looking back and like, it's going to be okay. Mm. Yeah.
I love that piece, man. That's awesome. And mate, what advice would you give to anyone who is thinking of, one, joining the military, and two, going down the SF path?
I guess there's two parts there. If you think of joining the military, give it a crack. Understand what capabilities are out there. Don't just grab on when they're like, how's this sound? Do your research, do your due diligence, and find out what it is you want to do. That would be for the regular army. And then for guys that are joining special forces, make it your life. Make it your life.
Because it's going to bite hard when you.
It's going to bite hard. Yeah.
You did that
with the preparation. Like, make it your life. The minute you decide that's the path that you want to take, make it your life. Understand it, know it, be fit for it, and prepare for it. Yeah. And
is something on that too, mate, is, and because you had, yourself, you had a couple of cracks, be prepared to fail too, because and because that's a big one that a lot of people don't. They're scared to fail, and is that something you'd add in as well?
Yes and no, because it's one of those things. Is like, because if you fail, they can have consequences. There's a limit there when you're like, be prepared to like fail, because there's things that you need to do in your job that will have a direct impact on someone else, and that maybe kill them. So while that's true in some aspects, you will fail. There's an element where you need to be on the ball as well. Like I said, you got to go all in. Can't be off the fairies when you're running through the house with a rifle pointing at the back of someone's head, right?
No, that's right, exactly, and that's that, and more around that sense of that. If you don't pass the first time, come back and have a second. If you come back and have a second crack, like, don't always let fail. There's two sides to that.
There are two sides. Look, we're not, I say this to dudes all the time. I'm definitely no Jason Bourne, dude, right? Like, that's Jason Bourne. Like, I'm just a normal dude who had that aspiration. So it's like, don't get this disillusion that you need to be this like super switched on soldier. Like, they'll see the attributes that are required for that unit. Especially dudes get real tied up with selection. It's just like they're looking for attributes. They're not looking for the super soldier. Like, they come around. There's some really fucking switched on dudes in these units, both units. But by no means do you have to be super. So they're looking for certain attributes that are required for you to, be at the standard required and be able to assimilate information accordingly and put it into action in a certain amount of time to be an operator.
Good point, mate. Good point. And, mate, looking back now, you've served with some amazing guys, both in the regular army and also in 2 Commando. And you guys suffered 12 commandos killed in action and 1 killed preparing for deployment. How do you remember these guys looking back now?
Obviously, some were before my time that I didn't know, but each one of them over time, like, they all have this awesome, unique story, you know. The guys that I know, when their anniversaries come around, like, I really deeply reflect on them. You know, I know it's not cliche, but I do live my life sometimes thinking, like, these guys didn't get the opportunity to live the rest of their life. Like, I shouldn't waste mine. And I think, you know, that's a good message for some of those veterans out there that are struggling, especially struggling with the, you know, butting their heads up against third-party organisations, etc., to try and move on with their lives. It's like, there's guys out there that didn't get the opportunity to live this life. So for the stress that you have now, like, just put the mouthguard in and, like, try and live the best life that you can, because that's the one message, right? It's like, these dudes made the ultimate fucking sacrifice and they don't get to live another day on this earth.
Absolutely. No, that's well put, mate. And looking back now, with 16, almost 17 years serving your country, was joining the army still the best decision you made, apart from getting married and having your kids?
Yeah, it's made me who I am today. You know, I struggle with this. It's an interesting one. We could probably talk about the next 2 hours, but I won't dwell on it. But it was one thing that I dwelled on, that I wanted to strip away all the elements that made me who I am, you know, because I was like, I need to be a civilian again. But then realised there's some really fucking good attributes that have come out of my time within the military and experiences, whether they've been negative and positive. So no, I wouldn't change it.
Awesome, man. And how do people get in contact with you, mate, if they do want to reach out and have a chat to you regarding, you know, joining SF or just the journey of where you've got to now? How do they get in contact with you?
Just go on to my social media, just at the real Shane Cav. Even if you go into that little spam box, I'll have a look, check it as much as I can. But yeah. Awesome.
Nah, mate, that's awesome. And yeah, just that's how we got in touch, mate, and then have just become good mates. So, mate, what are your plans going forward with your family now? Like, now that you're down in Tassie, What are the plans going into the future for you?
Well, as we sit out here and I look out the window at all this, like, urban sprawl, I can see that, like, that whole block there is, like, my property. But it's hard to come back to places like this, man. It's really hard. I enjoy my peace and quiet. But it's like you said, that contract, the daily renewable contract, to make myself a better person, right? Like, I'm fortunate enough. My wife, you know, she's quite successful. She does some pretty cool shit. And I get the opportunity to work on myself. You know, the body's starting to take its toll. I'm constantly getting scans, and I just try and keep the wheels greased to be the best version.
No, that's awesome, man. That's so, and that's it, man. At the end of the day, we get one shot, one crack, and yeah, man, it's what a story. It's just been absolutely. I've known your story for a while now, and I've wanted to get you on for almost, I'd say, over 12 months now, and we've finally managed to catch up. And Shane, it's been an absolute privilege, mate, to have you come on True Blue Conversations and share your story. And, mate, I want to say thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for all you do for veterans and first responders and anyone who's struggled with mental health. So, mate, thank you. It's been an absolute privilege. Thanks,
Cheers,
mate.
Bro. Nah, thank you.
Welcome, loyal listeners of True Blue Conversations. Today's episode is proudly sponsored by Australian Warfighter Coffee. Veteran owned and run, driven by a simple yet powerful motto: people over profit. Every dollar goes towards supporting veterans and first responder charity groups. Head on over to AustralianWarfighters.com and use the code TrueBlue for your exclusive discount. Because let's face it, any other coffee is just brown sadness water. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.